Chapter 589. Ha! The lava demons behind Sargeras also shouted in unison with pious expressions. They spread their hands to both sides, and red flames suddenly appeared on their bodies. Golden red lava flowed on their bodies. Sargeras clenched his fists, and the flames were extinguished. Then, he led the lava demons and began to twist and turn on the stage. Their movements were not graceful, but surprisingly, they were in unison. Their pious expressions did not seem like they were dancing, but more like they were doing something very solemn. Meg's eyes lit up, and he turned off the 2 stage lights. Golden red flames lit up the entire stage. The lava demons who were burning in flames exuded a fervent and powerful aura in the dark. Their pious expressions and powerful movements made him feel like he was at the edge of a volcano, watching a group of lava demons perform a pious ritual. However, a group of burning lava demons dancing in unison gave him a sense of coolness. The sacrificial dance of the lava demons. I didn't think I would have the chance to see it again. Crassus looked at the demons with a hint of surprise and nostalgia on his face. It's inexplicably solemn. I didn't expect demons to be so good at dancing, a young man exclaimed. Yes, and it looks so cool in the dark. I thought it was a little scary at first, but now I only think it's so cool, a young girl said excitedly. This should be a kind of ritual, a pious ritual, and not just a dance, an old man said softly, expressing some dissatisfaction with the noise of the young people. It's a pity that there's no background music for such a cool dance. Meg stroked his chin and pondered. Looking at the powerful movements of the demons, a thought flashed through his mind, and his eyes lit up. System, cut. I won't go to hell, for me. The horns and drums sounded slowly. Sargeras was stunned for a moment, but his eyes gradually lit up. The music was majestic, and he fell in love with it immediately. The lava demons used to have dedicated musicians for their rituals, but they were lost after the decline. Therefore, he did not stop moving. Instead, he slightly adjusted the speed of his movements and stepped to the beat perfectly. The other demons had similar expressions. They continued to dance to Sargeras' beat. With the beat and drumbeat, they felt that their steps were more accurate. Their footsteps on the steel stage made a uniform sound. With the accompaniment of the music, their aura instantly increased by several times. They were out of the sacrificial dance, and were even more pleasing to the eye. The Burning Legion accompanied by the Axe Gang's background music, dancing the ritual dance of the lava demons. This mix is really good. Meg nodded with satisfaction. Although he did not give each of them an axe, Sargeras and the others had completely jumped out of the song with their own style. In terms of momentum, they were naturally not comparable to a group of gangsters. With the background music, the Burning Legion lit up the atmosphere. Many people present swayed to the music. Looking at the burning flames and lava demons in the dark, the atmosphere was completely excited. Ha! 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 At the end of the background music, Sargeras suddenly raised his right fist and shouted, "Burning Legion." All the lava demons raised their hands at the same time and shouted in unison, "All for Ruggiamo." The whole place was silent. After a while, there was a burst of warm applause and laughter. Everyone was shocked by the powerful dance. But the slogan at the end, was it serious? Very exciting performance. Since it's a team dance, you can get 2 rewards. You can also choose the flavor of the mooncake. Meg also had a smile on his face. Although he had heard the slogan many times, every time he heard it from the Burning Legion, he could not help but want to laugh. He hoped that the heroes of Azeroth could rest in peace. Hee hee. Sargeras smiled sheepishly, and rubbed his hands together embarrassedly. Keel and Mond had similar expressions. "Mr. Mac, what's the name of the song you just played?" It made my blood boil. It would be great if we could play such music during the fire festival. Our people would be very happy, Sargeras said as he looked at Sargeras. Sargeras turned to Mag with a concerned expression as he accepted the mooncake. All of the lava demons were also looking at Mag with concern in their eyes. It was the same sacrificial fire dance, but with the addition of music, the entire dance seemed to have gained a soul. This song is called I Won't Go to Hell. If you want to play this song during the fire festival, you can come and borrow my player. I'll set it to a loop for you, Meg said with a smile. He did not think that Sargeras and the lava demons would be interested in this song. All right, thank you, Mr. Mac. Sargeras nodded with a smile, and returned to the back with the rest of the lava demons. With the Burning Legion's demonstration, the guests' interest was piqued again. Under the temptation of a gift box of mooncakes and 8 of their own choices, the guests began to perform all kinds of performances on stage. Some performed magic, some performed acrobatics, and there were even some who were showing off their love. Cece and Lulu walked off the stage with mooncake gift boxes in their hands with smiles on their faces, and a burst of boos rang out from below the stage to vent the anger of the single people. The gift boxes of mooncakes were quickly distributed, and the remaining mooncakes in the baskets were also distributed. The Ying girl group in Cheongsams ended the gala with a song of Spring is Here. Everyone present gave them a warm and long-lasting applause. After Meg announced the end of the gala, everyone began to disperse. Everyone had elated smiles on their faces. Even though the performance was a little amateurish, the sense of participation was something that no other gala could achieve. The delicious mooncakes, the interesting performances, and the entertainment of inviting friends and family made for an interesting mid-autumn festival. Mother! Mother! Is there going to be another mid-autumn festival tomorrow? A little boy held his mother's hand, and looked up with anticipation in his eyes. The young woman stroked the little boy's head with a smile, and said, Mr. Max said that the Mid-Autumn Festival is only held once a year. The next one will be held next year. All right. The little boy was slightly disappointed, but his eyes soon lit up again, and he happily said, then I'll wait for next year's Mid-Autumn Festival. I want to eat delicious mooncakes, and I want to perform on stage next year as well. The people next to him had kind smiles on their faces. How could their thoughts not be the same? Although today wasn't everyone's festival, the Mid-Autumn Festival had already been deeply engraved in everyone's heart. And with the delicious mooncakes, they couldn't help but look forward to next year's Mid-Autumn Festival. Chapter 590. Father, it's the Mid-Autumn Festival today, and the moon is the brightest and roundest. Mother must have seen our celebration and our delicious mooncakes, right? At the entrance of the restaurant, Amy leaned against Mag's chest as she looked up at the bright moon in the sky, which was like a white jade plate, and asked in a soft voice, "What's wrong?" All of their friends had already gone back, and the surroundings were completely silent. Only the moon was still glowing brightly through the gaps between the clouds. Yes. She must have seen Amy's adorable dance and our delicious mooncakes. Meg nodded in response. Mother. I'm Amy, I missed you so much. Amy cupped her little hands in front of her mouth as she yelled at the moon. Meg looked down at Amy, and his heart suddenly constricted as a hint of heartache welled up in his heart. But mooncakes are really delicious. Father used the moon to make them. It's a pity that you can't eat them, but I can eat them for you to see. Amy suddenly pulled out a green bean paste mooncake from her little pocket. She peeled off the wrapper and took a bite before chewing joyfully before swallowing. She then raised the mooncake up to the moon with a smile, and said, "Look, it really is super delicious. Just you wait, we'll eat the moon sooner or later, and then save you." Meg was still feeling a little sad, but he was immediately amused by Amy's words. He patted her little head, and said, "Then you have to work hard, Amy. The moon doesn't look very big, but it's actually even bigger than Chaos City. Really? Amy's eyes widened as she stared at Meg with incredulity. She then slowly moved the mooncake closer to her eyes, and asked in a perplexed manner, "But look, Father, the moon is just as big as my mooncake. I can eat half of it in one bite. It's just like when a person stands far away, he looks like a tiny ant. But when he stands in front of you, he looks very tall. This is caused by the distance. The moon is very far away from us, so the moon looks like a mooncake, but it's actually very big. This way, your mooching can live on the moon." Meg smiled and continued to explain. "Oh." Amy nodded. She took a bite of the mooncake in her hand and looked up at the moon with a hint of envy in her eyes. "I also want to live in the moon." "Why?" Meg looked at Amy in confusion. "In that case, if I get hungry, I can lie on the ground and take a bite of the moon. It must be super delicious," Amy said with anticipation as she looked at the moon. The image of Amy biting off half of the moon in one bite surfaced in Meg's mind, and he couldn't help but shake his head to rid himself of this strange image. However, he wasn't in a hurry to explain this to her. Childlike innocence was the most beautiful thing. Sometimes, so-called science was a little boring. "Father, tell me a story." "I want to hear a story with Mother today," Amy said as she looked up at Meg. "All right, today is the Mid-Autumn Festival, so Father will tell you the story of Chang-yi flying to the moon," Meg said with a smile. Okay. Amy nodded happily. She shifted her position to lie comfortably in Meg's arms and looked at Meg quietly. Meg thought for a moment, then smiled and began to tell the story. In ancient times, there were 10 suns in the sky. Meg had heard the story of Chang-yi flying to the moon many times when he was a child in his grandmother's arms. She would tell it at least once every Mid-Autumn Festival. Even though Meg was already in his 20s, he would still listen to her tell it at least once every Mid-Autumn Festival. That kind old woman, even though she had forgotten many people's names, still remembered how to make her grandson's favorite osmanthus cake. She would personally make a basket of it every Mid-Autumn Festival. That year, when he didn't hear the story again during the Mid-Autumn Festival, Meg couldn't sleep for an entire night. He felt that something was missing in his heart, and it was as if there was no way to fill it. But today, as he looked at Amy, who was listening to the story seriously in his arms, he felt as if the old man in the courtyard who used to tell him stories with a Hokkien accent had returned. This was a feeling of passing down a legacy. It was a bond that was formed between 3 generations, and the void in his heart seemed to have been filled in at this moment. Chang-yi ate the elixir of life, then flew to the sky and flew all the way to the moon. Meg said softly. "Then, did she eat the moon?" Amy suddenly asked curiously. "Why?" Meg asked with a smile. "Because, sometimes the moon will have a hole missing, and the hole will get bigger and bigger. In the end, almost the entire moon will be eaten, and then it will take a while for the hole to slowly grow back. Chang-yi must have eaten the moon after she went to the moon, right? Thankfully, the moon can grow on its own, so there's still a moon in the sky," Amy explained with a serious expression. Meg was speechless for a moment. It was really not easy to explain the moon's waxing and waning in such a logical manner. Furthermore, it contained the philosophy of a foodie. If she could eat such a big moon, the moon must be super delicious. "When we find Mother, I also want to eat the moon," Amy mumbled as she fell asleep in Meg's arms. The moon. "I'll eat you." Meg looked at the little girl in his arms, and he couldn't help but shake his head with a smile. He looked up at the sky, and half of the moon had already been obscured by dark clouds. It looked like it was going to rain again tonight. He slowly stood up with Amy in his arms, and just as he was about to open the door, he suddenly stopped and turned around. A figure slowly strode out from the plaza. He was walking with a slight limp, but his speed wasn't slow, and he soon arrived at the entrance of the restaurant. He turned to Meg with a grin and said, "Today's mooncakes were very delicious. Can you sell me another box? I want to bring some back for my son, he likes desserts." "If your son likes it, then of course, but it takes some time to make mooncakes, so come in and have a seat." Meg glanced casually at the dense forest not far away, but quickly withdrew his gaze. He nodded at the man standing at the door, and turned to open the door. Before he went in, he glanced at the few people standing on the right side of the street. The limp man hesitated momentarily before looking around before following Meg into the restaurant. Chapter 591. A muffled sound of thunder rang out, and the raindrops fell with pitter-patter sounds. Soon, the raindrops formed a line and splashed down. The pedestrians on the streets gradually quickened their pace, and most of them went to find a nearby shop to take shelter from the rain. This brought valuable customer flow to the shops that hadn't had many customers for the entire night. At this moment, Bertley was standing on a large tree in the plaza outside Amy's, and he was still standing in a completely still posture. Rain fell on his body as he stared intently at Amy's. The rain had soaked through the floor-to-ceiling crystal, and he was situated in a blind spot, so he couldn't see what was going on in the restaurant. After a brief hesitation, he slowly slid down the tree, crouching down as he moved slowly through the bushes. The sound of the rain falling on the tree leaves masked the faint sounds that he was making. As he approached Amy's, he began to feel a little nervous. This was the first time that he had felt this way ever since he had received the mission to spy on Lewis. Why did Lewis come here on his own after everyone else left? Did he really just want to buy a box of mooncakes for his child? Or is there some unspeakable secret between him and that man? Or perhaps, it has something to do with that incident from 3 years ago. With that in mind, Bertley's breathing began to accelerate. He had been following Lewis for over 9 months, and he was very familiar with his habits and personality. His actions today were clearly a little out of the ordinary, and that made him think of more things. He didn't know much about the incident from 3 years ago, but he knew who Alex was, and what kind of rewards he would receive if he could find and kill him. Those were rewards that he would never be able to attain in his entire life. This was something that the leader of the Cheetah Legion had told him in person prior to his departure. Of course, if he could bring this information back to the Cheetah Legion, he would also be rewarded handsomely. However, that reward paled in comparison to the reward of killing Alex. Furthermore, there were countless people in this world who wanted to kill Alex to make a name for themselves. He had once stood at the pinnacle of the Norland continent, and was the #1 knight of the Roth Empire. Even though he had been completely crippled, killing him was still something that would go down in the annals of history. Bertley was one of them. With his aptitude, it would be difficult for him to break through to level 5 in his lifetime. Even among the cheetahs, he could only be considered below average. He was destined to be an unknown spy for the rest of his life, carrying out boring tasks like monitoring Lewis day after day. He had walked out of the slums in the western part of Rodu, and had seen many filthy things in the past. He knew just how torturous it was to have to rely on murky rainwater to quench his thirst for food at night. As such, he had done everything he could to climb up the social ladder. He had joined the military, stabbed his comrades in the back, and taken all of the credit for himself. All of this was so that he could one day become a member of the elite class of the Roth Empire in the eastern part of the city. However, he gradually realized that it was impossible to do so without strength and status. With his qualifications and his background in the slums, it was impossible for him to live in that place for the rest of his life. In contrast, Alex, who had joined the military at around the same time as him, received the Empire Badge 3 years later, and was bestowed a large mansion by the king, which was situated in the center of the eastern part of the city. The heavens are always so unfair. Some people are descendants of major families, but they still possess extraordinary aptitude and can win the hearts of countless beauties. People like them deserve to die. Bertley stroked the dagger hanging from his waist as he murmured to himself with a smile. A flash of lightning flashed past, illuminating his sinister and twisted face. Black Hawk and the others were hiding under a canopy outside the Mawbai blacksmith shop, looking like a group of ordinary people who were taking shelter from the rain. "Captain, we've already asked around. The owner of this restaurant is called Mag, and his customers call him Boss Mag. His first name is Mag, and his last name is Go. That half-elf girl is his daughter, and her name is Amy. No one knows where he came from. All we know is that this restaurant opened about a month and a half ago, and business has been booming ever since. He's been widely referred to as a prodigy chef by his customers," the thin man whispered into Narson's ear. "Meg? Meg?" Narson's brows furrowed tightly. That name struck him with a sense of familiarity. All of a sudden, a thought flashed through his mind, and his heart began to race uncontrollably. Alex's name was widely known on the Norland continent, but not many people knew that it was actually only his surname. This was a major family that had a glorious history on the Norland continent, and had once guarded the borders of the empire for several centuries. Then, over a decade ago, Alex had made a name for himself on the southwestern border of the Roth Empire, and gradually made a name for himself on the Norland continent. After that, he slew demons and slayed evil dragons, and the name Alex gradually spread throughout the Norland continent, and he also approved of being referred to as such. However, very few people knew that his real name was actually Meg Alex. Narson was aware of this as prior to leaving Rodu, he had carefully read through all of the information related to Alex, and had committed most of it to memory. This was a habit of his, and also a basic requirement for a qualified member of the Black Falcons. A 3.5-year-old half-elf girl, a father and a daughter of unknown origins, and the same name, it was very difficult for such a coincidence to occur in the same person. Even though there were many unexplainable contradictions surrounding the owner of this restaurant, the information that he had obtained was enough for him to take a gamble. If the owner of this restaurant who could make such delicious mooncakes was really Alex, then he would be able to achieve a meteoric rise and become an honored guest of the Second Prince. If this guy wasn't Alex, then they had only killed a restaurant owner by mistake. They had many ways to escape from Chaos City, and there was no way that they would leave behind any evidence that pointed to the Black Falcons. Get ready to attack. Kill that restaurant owner, then capture that half-elf girl alive. Once we do that, we'll immediately split up and leave Chaos City, Narson said in a serious voice. Captain, is he really Alex? The thin man stared at Narson with incredulity, and asked, but how did Alex become a chef? How did he manage to open a restaurant in Chaos City? All of the other members of the Black Falcons also wore similar expressions. In particular, after tasting those delicious mooncakes, it was even more difficult for them to associate this man with the legendary Alex who had once slain dragons. This is an order, and all you have to do is carry it out. I'm the highest commander of the Black Falcons in Chaos City. A serious expression appeared on Narson's face as he raised a hand, and said, disperse and surround the restaurant. After the people inside leave, we'll begin our operation. Yes. Everyone nodded in unison. In the restaurant, Lewis looked at Meg, who had come downstairs again, and an apologetic expression appeared on his face as he said, sorry, looks like my arrival has caused you some trouble. Don't worry about it. You're not good at concealment anyway, so you won't be able to sense that you're being followed. Meg shook his head with a smile as he placed the large wine barrel in his hand onto the table. He patted the barrel as he turned to Lewis with a smile, and asked, want a drink first? Chapter 592. The rain was getting heavier and heavier, and it was splashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows, creating beautiful splashes under the light. The two men sat across from each other with a large mug of beer in front of them, and they looked at each other in silence. No one on the entire Norland continent would believe that Alex became a chef and made the best mooncakes in the world. Louis couldn't help but burst into laughter. Just like how no one would believe that lone wolf Louis XIII would become a businessman, right? Meg asked with a smile. I have no choice. I'm crippled, so I can't continue to stay on the battlefield and be a burden to my brothers. However, I'm still alive, so I have to at least find something interesting to do. Only then will I be able to live up to the fact that you rescued me from the orc encirclement. Louis nodded with a smile. That's right. If you're still alive, then you should find something interesting to do. I think cooking is quite interesting now, so I became a chef. That way, I can at least live up to the fact that you risked your entire family to bring me here from Rodu. Meg nodded in agreement. However, after doing business for so many years, I still think that killing people is more interesting, and I'm also better at it. Louis stroked the hilt of the long saber hanging from his waist. The cloth around the hilt was a little old, and it could be seen that the parts of the saber that he was holding were far more worn than the rest of the saber. I think cooking is more interesting than killing people now. Meg shook his head. Louis faltered slightly upon hearing this. He looked into Meg's eyes, and found that they seemed to be a little different from before. There was a hint of sharpness in them, and a hint of gentleness in them. This little girl is very adorable, she's not like you at all. Louis changed the topic very quickly with a smile. What do you mean not like me? You didn't see me when I fell in love with her. Amy and I are cut from the same mold. Meg was getting a little flustered upon hearing this. He crossed his arms in front of his chest in an annoyed manner, but there was a smile on his face as he looked at Louis. Louis, also known as 13, was born into a wealthy aristocratic family. His father was also a playboy in his youth, and had given birth to 12 older brothers before Louis was born. As such, Louis was ranked 13th on the list, and thus received his nickname, Louis XIII. Even though he came from a wealthy merchant family, Louis had no interest in doing business before the age of 26. Instead, he was more interested in practicing his saber skills, and he fled to the southwestern border at the age of 15, where he met Meg Alex, who had also just enlisted. These were Meg Alex's memories. Meg had thought that he would be able to analyze these memories like an outsider and use them to deal with the current situation. However, when Louis sat across from him, and he looked back at Louis in silence, he couldn't help but feel as if he were looking at an old friend. It was the kind of person that you could not contact for 3 years, but when you sat at the same table again and looked at each other, you could confidently tell yourself that the person opposite you was the one you could entrust your life to, the one you trusted the most. Meg looked at Louis, and he had this feeling in his heart. This feeling made him feel a little uneasy, but it was more of a longing. He began to understand the true meaning of the so-called memory fusion. The memories left by Meg Alex in his mind were not just information, but the emotions contained in those memories also affected Meg to a certain extent. For example, when he first met Amy, the strong feeling of wanting to protect her was not because of his sudden fatherly love, nor was it because of Amy's cute appearance. More importantly, it was because of Meg Alex's strong and deep fatherly love after fusing with him. It gave him a strong feeling of being Amy's father, and he wanted to protect her forever. Meg wasn't opposed to this type of fusion as it would make it easier for him to integrate into this world. Furthermore, Meg Alex had only left behind some emotional inclinations, so they wouldn't affect his independent will. He could even reject these inclinations, and he would have the final say in this world. However, Meg chose to accept these inclinations as this man had risked his life to bring Meg Alex and Amy out of Rodu. He then found someone to treat his injuries and undergo plastic surgery before bringing them to Chaos City. Meg only had 2 or 3 old friends in his past life. Now, he was willing to add one more. There was no more reassuring friendship between men. Louis looked at Meg, and suddenly burst into laughter. You're getting scarier and scarier when you laugh. Meg raised an eyebrow. I think back to when we first joined the army. You were forced to meow 100 times as a punishment by the captain because you were trying to act cool and not say anything. 3 entire battalions of soldiers came to watch you. Thinking back now, you really were adorable back then. Louis was laughing so hard that tears were flowing from his eyes. Meg's expression darkened upon hearing this. Even though he wasn't the one who had done that, it was still extremely embarrassing to hear about. When old friends were together, the scariest thing was to suddenly expose one another's past. Thankfully, Amy was already asleep. After laughing, Louis picked up the large beer glass on the table and downed all of the beer in the glass in one gulp. He then slammed the glass onto the table with a loud thud, and burped before giving Mag a thumbs up as he said, "That's some good beer. Want another?" Meg asked with a smile. "No, I'm drunk, and killing people isn't fun." Louis shook his head as he stood up with his saber in hand. He turned to Meg with a smile, and said, "Save the beer for me. If I don't make it back, you can drink it for me. You said the kid likes to eat mooncakes, so I left 2 boxes for you to take back," Meg said to Louis. "Don't worry, the kid still has his mother and 12 uncles. He won't go hungry, and no one will be able to bully him." Louis shook his head in a carefree manner as he turned to Meg, and said, "The kid is still asleep upstairs. There might be thunder, so you should go upstairs and accompany her. You're the only one behind her. Even though I'm lame, I'm still a lone wolf. It's just a few rats." Louis chuckled as he turned and walked out. Meg fell silent, and his hands slowly clenched into fists as he looked at the limping figure walking toward the restaurant door. His footsteps were very light, but his shoulders were very heavy. He pushed open the door, and the wind mixed with rain fell on his face. Just like that, he stepped into the storm. The door slowly closed, and the sound of the rain falling to the ground abruptly faded. It was as if the outside world had been cut off. Chapter 593. Gusts of wind and rain swept toward them, and it was as if the rain were pouring down from the sky. A large black umbrella opened up with a bang, blocking all of the rainwater outside. Mag held the umbrella in one hand and his sword in the other. He narrowed his eyes as he looked at the figure limping toward the bushes outside the door in the torrential rain. Meg caught a glimpse of the 2 figures hiding outside the blacksmith shop in Mumbai out of the corner of his eye, and he strode out of the restaurant. The wind and rain instantly drenched his pants and shoes, but his expression remained unchanged as he followed behind Louis at an unhurried pace. His grip on the umbrella was just as steady as his grip on the long sword. "Captain, he's come out on his own, and he's holding a sword." The thin man's eyes lit up, but a look of horror quickly appeared on his face. How could an ordinary chef carry a sword on a rainy night like this? If Narsen's judgment was correct, then this was Alex, that invincible man. Could they really kill him? Looks like he really is Alex, and that crippled man must have some sort of secret connection with him. It's very likely that he's the one who sent him here. We have to kill both of them when we attack. Narsen was a lot calmer, and aside from excitement, there was also a hint of wariness in his eyes. According to all of the information they had gathered, Alex was confirmed to have suffered irrecoverable injuries, and there was no way that he could pick up a sword again. However, a person's reputation was like a tree's shadow. Just the name Alex alone was enough to make people wary. Now that this man didn't look like he was crippled, naturally, they were a little cautious. Louis walked in front of the thicket and raised his right hand slightly. A cold light flashed from the scabbard. Right at this moment, a large umbrella appeared above his head, shielding him from the torrential rain. Louis's hand faltered slightly, and he turned to look at Meg with a perplexed expression. The rain is very heavy, I'll give you a ride, Meg offered with a smile. Sure. Louis looked into Meg's eyes and hesitated for a moment. Then, he slid his saber back into its scabbard and followed Meg into the square. One umbrella, two people, walking neither too fast nor too slow. They didn't look like people who were surrounded at all. Bertley, who was hiding in the bushes, slowly put down the dagger in his hand. His back was wet from the rain or sweat. He stared intently at the young man holding the umbrella. He could clearly see the long sword in the young man's hand. The body of the sword was long and slender. It was different from the sword in the legends. However, walking side by side with Louis on such a rainy night with a sword in hand was enough to explain a lot of things. However, Bertley wasn't in a hurry to get up because he had just discovered a few of his peers. Their goal should be the same as his. Since they weren't from the cheetahs, there was only one possibility left, the Blackhawks. The cheetahs under the first prince's command and the Blackhawks under the second prince's command were set up to do things that weren't suitable to be done on the surface. The two of them were natural enemies, and they had clashed countless times in the past. Now, they had encountered each other for the same goal. He was the only one from the cheetahs, while the Blackhawks had an entire team of 8. He wasn't stupid enough to jump out and take the lead. Let's go. Narsen waved a hand and led the way into the rainy night. The 7 members of the Blackhawks also followed along in silence. They spread out and followed behind the 2 people holding the umbrella. The mantis stalks the cicada, unaware of the oriole behind it. I hope Louis and that guy who I don't know if he's Alex can kill a few more of the Blackhawks. Only then will I have a chance to kill them all. Bertley hid in the darkness for a while before following everyone into the depths of the Aiden Square. You shouldn't have come. With your injuries, it'll be very difficult for you to kill anyone even if you can recover. Also, you'll be completely exposed, Louis said in a soft voice. Louis said softly. His voice was blocked by the falling rain outside the umbrella. There was a hint of worry in his eyes. I find cooking more interesting now, but it's undeniable that killing people is my forte. As long as I can still hold a sword, I can kill people. A smile appeared on Meg's face as he glanced at the people following behind him out of the corner of his eye. He shook his head and said, some of them came here because of you, while others came to me of their own accord. If I can't kill them all before they spread the news, then my identity will be exposed. Hence, they have to die. You've changed your sword. Louis glanced at the long sword in Meg's hand. This one is more suitable for me now. Besides, isn't my sword being kept in the royal palace as a souvenir? Meg chuckled with a hint of mockery in his eyes. How many people are there? Louis asked in a soft voice. 8 plus 1. I'll take care of those 8. And you kill the one who came here with you. Be quick, we lose if even one of them gets away. Meg searched for a suitable location in the darkness. He had no choice but to kill people in Chaos City. If he made any mistakes, he would have no choice but to flee with Amy again. Did you meet the goddess? She helped you recover from your injuries, and taught you how to cook. Louis looked at Meg with a skeptical expression. I've only recovered a portion of my injuries. I'm around the 3rd tier, but killing people shouldn't be an issue. Meg shook his head. All right, I'll kill that one, then help you. Louis nodded. He had no objections to Meg's decision. Meg stood under a large tree with his umbrella. This was a small forest deep within the Aiden Square, and it was quite far away from the restaurant. No one would come here on a rainy night like this, and the sound of rain and thunder was enough to drown out all sounds. The large umbrella lowered slightly, and when it was raised again, Meg was the only one standing under the tree. Lewis had already disappeared. Within the inky black forest, the sound of raindrops falling onto the umbrella was like that of a drum being played in the rain. Narsen stopped in his tracks, and an almost inaudible whistle sounded. It sounded like the cry of an unknown insect, and all of the black falcons immediately stopped in their tracks. They looked at Meg with wary expressions, waiting for the signal to attack. Even though this man didn't resemble the man who had once dominated the entire Norland continent, they were still struck by a sense of immense pressure at the sight of him standing under the tree. Alex was an insurmountable obstacle for all knights on the Norland continent. He was also considered to be the pinnacle of human combat prowess. This was evidenced by the fact that close to 10 great magic casters, demons, and knights had been mobilized to kill him. "I don't care if you're Alex or not, you're going to die tonight." Narsen gripped the long sword hanging from his waist tightly as he looked at Meg standing under the tree. He let loose 2 urgent whistles from the small black whistle in his mouth, and drew his long sword before rushing soundlessly toward the tree like a wraith-like figure. Chapter 594. The rain seemed to have become even heavier. It rarely rained in Chaos City during autumn, let alone such a heavy downpour. This made the customers sitting in the shops waiting for the rain to stop even more worried. They didn't want to just sit there, so they could only ask the waiter to refill their teacups, cut some beef, and get a jug of wine. If they didn't want to go home in the rain, they had to pay some money. After all, in such a heavy downpour, they would get wet even if they held an umbrella. This made the shop owners beam with joy. Usually, they wouldn't have any business at this time of the year, but thanks to Mamie's, so many customers were attracted to the Mid-Autumn Festival party. Just one night of heavy rain, and they made a whole day's worth of money. If only Mamie's held such parties often. A fat shop owner stood at the door, chuckling as he looked at the heavy rain outside. Meg was standing under the tree at this moment, and he wasn't in the mood to hold another party. He was looking at the 6 figures rushing toward him from all directions with a grave expression. There was a light not far away, and that was a magic caster preparing to release a spell. Thankfully, it was only an elementary spell, which meant that the 2 magic casters weren't intermediate magic casters. This was somewhat good news for Meg. He was fighting against so many magic casters, and if there were powerful magic casters who could deal a fatal blow to him at any time, it would be terrible. A similar situation had occurred on that rainy night 3 years ago. The great magic casters had come together, the 10th tier knights had charged toward him with heavy cavalry, and the 10th tier demons had attacked him with all their might. The memory of that fierce battle was still engraved in Meg's mind to this day. Although there weren't any great magic casters, 10th tier knights, or 10th tier demons present today, he wasn't the same Meg Alex who could fly and slay dragons in the sky. His opponents had come prepared. There were 6 warriors and 2 long-range magic casters. This wasn't a combat squad that was commonly seen in the Empire's military, so they were most likely subordinates of the second prince. Judging from their speed, there were at least 2 4th-tier knights, and the rest were all at least 3rd tier. He had just recovered his 3rd tier strength, and he had just practiced his swordsmanship in the test field for the god of cookery last night. He was holding the long sword that he had just exchanged from the system, which was most suitable for his current power level. Meg was standing on the brink of death again, and if he failed this time, no one would spare his life. Therefore, he could only risk his life. However, this time, he had his most trusted old friend by his side. The hand holding the umbrella suddenly loosened, and the black umbrella slowly fell to the ground like a rootless duckweed in the heavy rain. The figure that had been standing under the tree for a long time suddenly moved. Meg, who had one foot on the tree trunk, shot forward like an arrow to meet Narsen head-on. Meg's mind was filled with the countless combat experiences that Alex had left behind, as well as the solutions to different predicaments. Power alone wasn't enough to make him the #1 knight on the Norland continent. Brains were more important. Otherwise, he would have already died when he was surrounded on the Dragon Island. However, after he killed the most powerful evil dragon despite the severe injuries he sustained, the encirclement was automatically disbanded. Not a single giant dragon dared to stop him as no one knew whether they would be the next to die. This team of 8 was very powerful. At the very least, it would be quite difficult for Meg to deal with them in his current state. In particular, the 2 third-tier magic casters were still charging up their power, and it would be quite difficult for him to defend himself against their third-tier spells. As such, if he wanted to break out of this predicament, then he had to kill their leader first. This was the law of the jungle that was applicable everywhere. Narsen looked on at the oncoming Meg, and his expression was also quite tense. His heart was thumping rapidly, and the hint of fear in his eyes gradually turned into madness. His long sword was trembling slightly, not from nervousness, but from excitement. Alex was indeed no longer the same Alex he had been in the past. Otherwise, he would have been sliced in half with just a single swing of his sword. However, he was now taking the initiative to attack Narsen. The number 1 knight was so proud that he refused to even accept a human's challenge, yet he was now attacking Narsen. Furthermore, his speed appeared to be only at the level of a second-tier knight. Narsen didn't know how Narsen had managed to recover his crippled limbs to the level of a second-tier knight, but even if he was Alex, he still wouldn't be able to defeat him. He had been at the 4th tier for close to 10 years, and his speed, strength, and spiritual power were all superior to Meg's in every aspect. As such, how could Narsen defeat him? A deranged smile appeared on Narsen's face as he drew his long sword and thrust it directly toward Meg's heart. He could already envision his long sword piercing through Alex's heart. After that, the entire Norland continent would go crazy over this news, and he would become the commander of the Black Falcons, as well as a truly important figure in the Roth Empire. The other members of the Black Falcons were still rushing toward them, and the 2 magic casters had already completed their incantations, ready to unleash their spells at any moment. At this moment, Meg and Narsen had already closed in on each other. Narsen's sword was black, and there was a deep crimson groove running down the center of the blade. There was lethal poison smeared all over the blade, and even healing magic casters wouldn't be able to save him if he were to stab his opponent in the heart. Meg's sword was still in its scabbard, and as soon as he was within 2 swords of Narsen, his speed abruptly accelerated, and his long sword was silently drawn from its scabbard. Narsen's eyes widened upon seeing this. The spiritual power that he had injected into his long sword made it shimmer with golden light. This was his most powerful sword strike, and he had slain many 4th-tier opponents in the past. However, he couldn't help but feel a chill run down his spine at the sight of Tang Wulin's seemingly nonchalant slash. Tang Wulin's sword had been drawn very quickly, and it appeared to be very light and gentle, but it was even faster than his eyes could follow. It was so fast that he didn't even have time to react with his long sword. This was definitely not a sword strike that a second-tier knight could unleash. It was so fast that even a 4th-tier knight couldn't match it. Furthermore, the speed that Tang Wulin had unleashed during that final step was also not something that a second-tier knight could achieve. This meant that Tang Wulin had concealed his true power. Narsen's heart sank, but a crazed look appeared on his face. He injected all of his spiritual power into his sword. Even if Alex was concealing his true power, he most likely hadn't reached the 4th tier yet. Otherwise, he wouldn't have used such a method against him. Alex was invincible among his peers, this was something that everyone knew. Silver light flashed across Meg's long sword. It was a very faint light, and if one wasn't paying close attention, it would have been very difficult to detect. Clang! A crisp sound rang out as Tang Wulin's sword clashed with Tang Wulin's sword. Chapter 595. Narsen had seen many things. When he was 18 years old, he had received his military uniform from his father and become an honorary knight of the empire. After that, his father had been beaten to death for standing up for a spoiled brat on the street. As an imperial knight, there was nothing he could do against those high and mighty nobles. That level of despair had struck him with a sense of asphyxiation, and he had even considered taking them down with him. After that, a nobleman helped him throw those nobles into prison, and the nobleman who had done the deed died in prison. After that, he became a member of the Black Falcons. There were many people like him in the Black Falcons. They weren't necessarily doing it for money or power, but they were absolutely loyal to the second prince. Even if they had to die, they wouldn't hesitate in the slightest, as their second life had been bestowed upon them by the second prince. They were the Black Falcons, and also loyal men of sacrifice. As such, even though they knew that the most important goal of the Black Falcons was to find the Empire's hero Alex and kill him, they were still thinking about how to accomplish that goal. Alex had once been the brightest star in the Empire's military. He had illuminated the entire Roth Empire, and even on the Norland continent, his light couldn't be concealed. He was a 10th-tier knight, a dragon-slaying warrior, the Empire's youngest general. Countless titles spoke of his greatness and glory, as well as his power that was regarded as the pinnacle of the human race. However, this man had been ambushed by countless people, and all of his limbs had been crippled. He had disappeared from everyone's sight in the name of death, but they had found him again. However, Narsen was still unable to withstand his sword strike. He could clearly see that the sword strike wasn't very fast, and he could clearly sense that Alex was only around the 3rd tier, but he was still unable to withstand it. Narsen's eyes widened as he looked on at the slender long sword that had sliced through his own long sword. The sharp blade of the sword was shimmering with a cold light, and he couldn't tell if it was due to sword intent or something else. A chill ran down his neck, and all of his senses receded like a receding tide. Blood gushed forth from his neck, and he couldn't even feel his own body anymore. All he could see was a headless corpse spurting blood from his neck. So, he really is Meg Alex. As expected, you're still the same old man. A thought flashed through Narsen's mind before he completely lost consciousness. The sharp long sword slid past Narsen's neck, and Meg charged toward the next black-robed man without even looking back. A pillar of blood soared into the sky, and a head rolled to the side. Everything happened in an instant. The eyes of the Black Eagle group widened when they saw this scene. Although they were terrified, none of them retreated. In fact, none of them even made the slightest sound. They held their weapons tightly and continued to charge toward Meg. Everyone could die, but the mission had to be completed. Otherwise, even if they returned alive, their fate would be worse than death. Although Narsen had been insta-killed, judging from Meg's attacks, it was clear that he hadn't recovered to the 4th rank yet. He must have been hiding his strength from the start, allowing Narsen to let down his guard before abruptly increasing his speed to land the killing blow. However, there were still 7 of them left. In terms of numbers and strength, there was no reason for them to flee. Moreover, if they succeeded in killing Alex, no matter who survived in the end, they would be able to obtain something that they would never be able to touch in their entire lives. This was undoubtedly extremely attractive to them. Violent Wind Blade. One of the magic casters pointed his wand at Meg, and a violent tornado appeared out of thin air. Green and yellow wind blades danced through the air like razor-sharp blades, sweeping up dirt, leaves, and gravel as they hurtled toward Meg. Scorching Flame Slash. Another magic caster yelled almost at the exact same moment. A crescent-shaped pillar of flames that was 3 to 4 meters in length rose into the air. It was as if a giant had slashed a flaming saber through the air, hurtling toward Meg at an even faster speed than the tornado, thereby blocking Meg's path of advancement. Howling winds and violent blades of flame hurtled toward Tang Wulin, but the black-robed men were still charging toward him, and they had already surrounded him. Trees were uprooted by the fierce winds, and leaves that had been soaked by the rain were roasted yellow by the scorching flames. Waves of heat surged toward Tang Wulin, and he could already see the cold gleam of the weapons in the hands of the black-robed men. Meg's expression was still as calm as ever. He glanced at the fierce winds and flaming blades that were hurtling toward him from the front and the side, and suddenly stepped on a large tree beside him. His body instantly changed directions, and he passed by two large trees that were thick enough for several people to encircle their arms around to encircle them. He then stabbed his sword into the heart of a skinny man who was stealthily charging toward him. A dagger pierced through Meg's sleeve, and a large gash was drawn downward. The tip of the dagger was smeared with black poison, and it was only a hair's breadth away from slicing through his arm. The scorching flame slash and the violent blades of wind collided behind Meg with a dull thud. The flames were torn apart by the fierce winds, and the violent tornado was also severed. Meg twisted his wrist, and the dagger that had pierced his heart was pulverized. He didn't stop in the slightest as he charged toward the two magic casters not far away. "Stop him!" The remaining fourth-tier vice-captain's expression changed drastically as he yelled. He had already figured out what Meg was planning. After the deaths of two of their comrades in quick succession, all of the Black Falcons were feeling quite distressed. On top of that, Meg had killed the most powerful member of their team, Narsen, before killing the weakest one, the thin man. This kind of random sequence of killings was extremely stressful, and they didn't know who would be the next to die. However, Meg's objective was very clear. He was targeting the two magic casters. If he were to get into close combat with these two magic casters, the consequences would be unimaginable. Furthermore, the two third-tier magic casters were extremely important to their battle team, so they definitely couldn't allow them to die. The two magic casters had also discovered Meg's objective, and in their panic, they didn't forget to slap a few disposable magic barriers onto their bodies. Light began to glow from their wands, and they were preparing to unleash an even more powerful spell. Seeing as Meg's target was clearly them, this was a massive crisis, but it was also their best opportunity. As long as they could hold on for a while, their remaining teammates would be able to tear him to shreds. The magic barriers on their bodies were custom-made by the magic casters in the Magus Tower, and they were powerful enough to withstand attacks from fifth-tier magic casters. As such, they were confident that they would be able to withstand Meg's attacks, even if it was just a single sword strike. The Black Falcons were also well aware of this, and they had already activated their spiritual power to its maximal extent in order to seize this brief window of opportunity. Aside from slaying dragons, Mag Alex's forte lay in slaying magic casters. Regardless of whether they were dark magic casters or magic casters who harbored enmity toward the Empire or the common people, he had slain many of them. Mages were very confident in their advanced magic barriers. They always felt that as long as their level was high enough, melee opponents of the same level would not be able to break through the barrier. However, Meg was an exception. He had once had the opportunity to join the Magus Tower, and there was a very good chance that he would have become the center of attention. This was because when he first came to Rodu, his magic aptitude had been discovered, and he had been brought to Rodu. Several elders of the Magus Tower had fought to take him in as a disciple, but he had turned them all down in the end. He only wanted to be a knight, and if he became a magic caster, he would not be able to live a carefree life of riding a horse with a sword. As a knight, he would have to face all types of opponents. In particular, after becoming a border guard of the Empire, he would have to face all types of deadly dangers. Among them, magic casters who carried all types of advanced magic barriers with them were very difficult to deal with. If a magic caster of the same level had a more powerful advanced magic barrier, then the battle would become very troublesome. As such, Meg created his own sword technique, and after countless experiments, he was able to easily break through most advanced magic barriers. Not many people knew about this, as most of the people who knew about this were already dead. Meg pulled his long sword out of the chest of the second magic caster, and he was completely surrounded. For swords and sabers were almost all aimed at him at the same time, and they were all coming from different directions and angles in unison, sealing off all avenues of escape. With a flick of his sword, he first deflected the long sword that was aiming for his heart, and at the same time, cut off one of his fingers. The long sword was lifted up diagonally, cutting off the long saber that was furiously chopping down. Following that, his body suddenly fell backward. 3 small arrows brushed past his face, bringing about a gust of wind that almost made one's skin hurt. Taking advantage of the momentum, the long sword was sent into the lower abdomen of the last black-clothed fatty who was holding a short saber. In a short instant, Meg had evaded 4 lethal attacks, and also severely wounded one of them. However, the danger wasn't over yet. A dagger pierced toward his lower back, and even though he twisted his body to evade, his clothes were still torn apart. 2 small flying daggers flew past his ears, severing a few strands of his hair. If he had tilted his head slightly slower, the flying daggers would have nailed him between his eyebrows. The magic caster who had his lower abdomen pierced endured the pain, and he had no intention of giving up just like that. He was still wielding his dagger as he charged toward Meg. His long sword danced in the darkness, and there were beads of sweat on Meg's forehead. His body had only just recovered to the 3rd level, and killing 4 magic casters in an extremely short period of time had almost completely exhausted all of his spiritual power. Every step he took now was like dancing on a tightrope, and he was surrounded by perils. If he wasn't careful, there was a very good chance that he would be the one to fall today. You guys always like to bully others with numbers, and that's despicable. But this time, I'm not late. Lewis appeared behind the fat man at an unknown time, and said coldly. The long sword in his hand had already pierced through the fat man's lower back, connecting with the wound on his lower abdomen. The remaining 3 were slightly startled. Although they had seen Meg walking with a cripple, their attention had been on Meg, so they didn't pay much attention to him. They didn't expect him to suddenly jump out and kill one of them. Just as the 3 of them were distracted, Meg slapped a big tree to the side, and took the opportunity to circle behind the tree, escaping the encirclement of the 3. He turned around and charged toward the last level for night with his sword. Ding ding ding, a series of crisp sounds of swords rang out. The 2 men's swords had clashed countless times in a short period of time, and Lewis was also fighting with another knight. Chapter 597. You've never asked such boring questions in the past. Lewis glanced at the last assassin lying in a pool of blood before turning to Meg with a peculiar expression. Perhaps I've changed since I became a father. Meg shrugged as he sheathed his long sword. He tore off a strip of cloth to bandage the wound on his right arm, then glanced at Lewis's bleeding thigh. He tore off half of his shirt and tied it around his thigh. That's true. You're always full of ideas. Lewis nodded in agreement. He didn't even furrow his brows as he was bandaging his wound. The rain was still pouring down, drowning out all sounds. The traces and bloodstains left behind by the battle were quickly washed away. Meg bandaged Lewis's wound in a simple manner before standing up. The 2 of them looked at each other and smiled at the same time. Their clothes were in tatters, their bodies had sustained injuries of varying degrees, and their wet hair was plastered to their scalps. The 2 of them appeared to be in a very sorry state. Only the 2 of them knew just how dangerous the battle had been. If their teamwork had been slightly off, they would have been the ones lying on the ground right now. Or if one of the 9 assassins had managed to escape, the outcome would have been equally unimaginable. Meg's chest rose and fell violently as a deep sense of fatigue spread through every muscle in his body. He had killed 6 assassins in less than 3 minutes, and he had already unleashed Alex's swordsmanship to the extreme in his current physical condition. After all, there were 2 4th-tier swordsmen and 2 3rd-tier magic casters among them. Any 3rd-tier knight would have definitely been unable to complete such a mission. Of course, Lewis had also played an extremely important role in this. He had single-handedly killed the hidden assassin, and then helped him kill the last 2. "You didn't have to take such a risk," Lewis said to Meg as he sheathed his long sword. "Shouldn't I have said the same thing to you 3 years ago?" Meg countered with a question of his own. This guy also had a son who was waiting for him at home. "Your throat was slit 3 years ago. That's why you didn't say a word along the way." Lewis shook his head. "But you have to admit that I'm better at killing people," Meg said with a smile. "I'm a proper merchant now." "It's normal that I'm not good at killing people," Lewis said matter-of-factly. "Right now, we need to take care of this place so that Joshua and Sean's men won't be able to find us so quickly," said Meg as he looked at the scattered corpses. "I'm good at this." Lewis rummaged through his clothes and pulled out a small ceramic bottle. He used his hand to block the rain, opened the bottle cap, and shook it on the corpse. A bit of yellowish-brown powder fell on the corpse, and as soon as it came into contact with the blood, a green flame burst out. In the blink of an eye, the corpse was burned to ashes. Washed away by the rain, there was no trace of it left on the ground. A proper merchant wouldn't carry something like this with him. "You're not robbing people and burning corpses while you're doing business, are you?" Meg pinched his nose and took a couple of steps back. This corpse incineration powder was not a very common magic powder, but it was indeed the most useful in destroying corpses. On a rainy night like this, even if someone could tell that a fierce battle had taken place here, no one would be able to find anything related to the corpses. "It's not easy to be a merchant these days, so I have to carry some self-defense items with me." Lewis slowly dragged his injured leg toward the second corpse. Following the same pattern, the 9 corpses quickly disappeared. The blood had been washed away by the pouring rain, and it was very difficult to erase the traces left behind by a battle without a professional magic caster. However, no one would notice the battle that had taken place here on a rainy night like this. Perhaps someone would notice it the next day, and the people of the Grey Temple would come to investigate, but no one would link this battle to Amy's and Meg's deaths. "Let's go back. I'll bandage your wounds again. It won't look good if you can't walk with your legs." Meg erased all of the possible evidence that could lead people to the same conclusion. He made his way over to Lewis, and carried him on his back before walking toward Mamie Restaurant. Lewis didn't refuse Meg's offer, and he asked in a perplexed manner, "Was Sean involved in what happened back then?" Meg shook his head, and replied, "I'm not sure if he was involved back then, but seeing as he sent someone to follow you, it means that he wants to be involved now. He doesn't want me to appear again and disrupt the competition between him and Josh." But if Josh was the mastermind behind what happened back then, and he didn't participate, why would he be worried about you appearing again? In any case, you're not going to side with Josh, so that should be good news for him. Lewis was still perplexed. "Because Sean knows that I won't side with him either." From the moment he revealed that he wanted to instigate a second racial war, it was already destined that he and I were on the same side, Meg said with a hint of mockery. "My wish is world peace." TSK, who were the 2 people who stirred up so much chaos in the world back then? Lewis clicked his tongue. After a while, a serious expression appeared on his face as he said, "You can't choose Josh, and you can't choose Sean, so who are you going to choose?" "The 3rd prince who's obsessed with being a carpenter." "I don't think that's a choice I have to make, right? I'm no longer Alex, I'm just the boss of Amy's in Chaos City. Besides, if I really have to choose, don't you think that Carpenter Prince is more pleasing to the eye?" Meg asked with a smile. Lewis faltered slightly before nodding in response. "That's true." Under the cover of the heavy rain, the 2 of them returned to Amy's. The blinds on the floor-to-ceiling windows were drawn down, and Meg asked the system to get him a professional-grade first aid kit. After treating Louis's wound, he sutured the gash on his thigh before bandaging it. In the magical world, a surgical procedure like this wasn't very advanced. However, as long as his bones and arteries weren't damaged, the wound would heal very quickly, and it wouldn't affect his normal movements. Who would have thought that not only did you learn how to cook, but you've also learned how to treat wounds? I'm very curious about what happened to you during the past 3 years. Louis could feel a slight numbness in his thigh, and the pain from his wound had been significantly alleviated. He turned to Meg with a curious look in his eyes. That's a secret. Meg smiled and didn't say anything. He poured himself a glass of beer, and took a big gulp before heaving a satisfied sigh. Chapter 598. Menard stood beside the desk with a respectful expression, and said, "Ever since you agreed to join the Suede Textiles shop with young Mistress Gloria, the Suede Textiles shop sales haven't increased significantly, and they're still incurring losses. However, they've recently hired a lot of workers to organize the fabrics in the warehouse." Organize the fabrics from the past. Jeffrey's hands paused momentarily as he flipped through his book, and his brows furrowed as he said, "They're barely selling any of the new fabrics this year. What use are the fabrics from the past? Has Mars also become a child with a child?" Menard stood off to the side in a respectful manner, and didn't say anything. He didn't have the right to comment on his young predecessor, and Jeffrey wasn't asking him a question. Instead, he was just muttering to himself out of habit. There are still over 20 days left. If we can't even manage a textile shop well, then there's no need for us to continue to be a candidate for the position of successor. Jeffrey continued to flip through his book, and didn't say anything further. Will such clothes really be welcomed? In a room behind the Suede Textiles shop, Mars and Gloria were looking at the 3 sets of clothes on the table with unsure expressions on their faces. There were 3 sets of clothes, one of which was an off-shoulder dress, one of which was a strapless evening gown, and one of which was a chiffon dress. The first 2 dresses were simply too revealing for Gloria's liking. In the past, she had almost completely covered herself in a black cloak, so it was already a huge breakthrough for her to be able to wear a dress that exposed her forearms. It was simply unimaginable that her shoulders, collarbones, and even a large portion of her back would be exposed. Furthermore, all of the other young mistresses in Chaos City would most likely find it difficult to accept such a bold dress. However, that strapless evening gown was simply too extravagant. The chiffon dress underneath was both hazy and sexy, and if she were to wear it, she would definitely become the center of attention on the dance floor. But these 2 dresses are really beautiful. If I wear them and admire them myself, or only let him admire them, they should be very beautiful. Gloria thought to herself as a faint blush appeared on her face. Her eyes fell on the last dress. This dress was relatively conservative. It had a loose style with half sleeves and beautiful embroidery at the collar. There was also a light golden chrysanthemum embroidered on the left side of the chest. It was like a finishing touch, making it hard for people to look away. The style was not much different from the commonly seen dresses on the market, but the details on the upper body made this dress stand out from the rest. The third item shouldn't be a problem. As long as we advertise it well, we should be able to sell a lot of them. As for the first and second items, I suggest that you discuss it with Mr. Meg and make some minor changes. Once we start mass production, we won't be able to go back on our word. We only have 20 days left, and 3 sets of clothes is our limit. Mars looked at Gloria with a serious expression. Gloria thought to herself for a moment before nodding, and said, "All right, I'll make a trip to Mamie's tomorrow morning. Mars, tell them to find the best tailor right now to start making the 3rd dress. Make sure to make an identical dress according to the size. By the way, the tailor doesn't have to be the most renowned, but the craftsmanship has to be the best." They have to be able to make the most perfect dress according to the blueprint, and don't make any changes, Gloria added. All right, I'll get it done right away. Marzu nodded and turned to walk out of the room. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly as he thought to himself, this little girl really can't be underestimated. As long as this plan succeeds, no one will be able to doubt her position as the successor candidate. Can I trouble you to take this drunk customer back to the inn? Make sure to give him a hand on the way up, his legs aren't very nimble. Outside the restaurant, Meg had changed into a set of clean clothes and helped Louis onto a horse-drawn carriage. He placed a large box of mooncakes into the carriage as he spoke to the driver with a smile. I'm not drunk. I can still drink. Louis slurred as he shot a glance at Meg. All right, don't worry, I'll take him up to the inn. The driver nodded with an enlightened expression. He wasn't planning to go out in such a heavy rain, but this drunk man had paid him quite a hefty sum, so he decided to make the trip in the rain. However, this man really did appear to be very drunk. Meg looked on as the horse-drawn carriage disappeared into the rain. Following the events that had transpired that night, his peaceful life had also taken a turn for the worse. Josh and Sean had been hunting him relentlessly for the past 3 years, and Louis's appearance today was only the beginning. Thankfully, things were still under control. Even though he had left no traces behind, it was enough for Josh and Sean to ascertain that he was in Chaos City, and that wasn't good news for him. Just a small team had almost taken him down tonight. If more powerful opponents were to appear, he might not be as lucky as he was today. It was very important for him to become more powerful, but even if he were to return to his peak, he would most likely end up being hunted down again 3 years ago. As such, he had to give himself more bargaining chips in addition to his own powers so that he could challenge Josh and Sean in a direct confrontation. At the very least, he wouldn't have to fight to the death on his own like he did 3 years ago. Meg wasn't Alex, after all. Compared to Battle, he was more like a businessman. He knew exactly what to do at the right time in order to maximize his benefits. Money isn't everything, but it can make countless powerful beings work for you. As such, making a lot of money is very important. Meg thought to himself. The Buffett family had never produced any powerful beings, but there weren't many people on the Norland continent who dared to mess with them as all of the rulers of the various races were on their side. Even now, no one knew just how many powerful beings were hiding in that mysterious manor. Looks like it's time to contact the City Lord's castle and young Mistress Hill. I can become the richest man in the world if I buy clothes, but it's still energy that has the final say. Meg turned and entered the restaurant before locking the door. After looking at Amy's adorable sleeping face for a long time, Meg slowly leaned over and kissed her on the forehead. The wound on his left arm was throbbing with pain, and his brows furrowed slightly as he made his way back to his bed. Chapter 599. The rising sun shone down on the houses in Chaos City, gilding the domed and pointed roofs of the houses with a layer of golden sand. The torrential rain had washed the entire city clean, and there were still sparkling and translucent water droplets hanging from the leaves of the trees beside the streets. There was a refreshing smell in the air. The last hint of summer's heat had been completely doused by the heavy rain, and the coolness of autumn had officially arrived. Everyone who opened their doors had bright smiles on their faces, and their mood seemed to have improved because of the pleasant weather. Meg pulled up the blinds, and the sunlight shone through the floor-to-ceiling windows onto his chef's suit, illuminating the smile on his face. His super-regenerative abilities had almost healed the wound on his left hand overnight, and he had bandaged it again when he got up in the morning. His chef's suit had completely healed. Ding! The system has issued a new mission. Please open a branch restaurant of your own within 5 days. There are no restrictions on the location or size of the branch, but it must be a food-themed restaurant. If the mission is successful, you will receive a chance to spin the God of Cookery promotion wheel, and there is a 100% chance that you will win. Open a branch restaurant. Meg raised an eyebrow, and pondered for a moment before saying, "Aren't you being a little too hasty? I can open a branch restaurant, but the facilities should be included in the mission reward, right? Renovations, and all kinds of facilities. Otherwise, how can I open a barbecue stall in 5 days?" Barbecue stalls are an important part of China's supper scene, and they are enough to support an independent restaurant. "I don't think there's anything wrong with your idea," the system replied in a serious manner. "System, you might have some misconceptions about the concept of a branch restaurant. Most of the time, a restaurant will choose to open a branch restaurant because the restaurant's business is very good, and the restaurant has the spare capacity to expand its business. Mamie's business and customer flow have reached the requirements for a branch restaurant, but all of the dishes in the restaurant have to be handled by me, especially the beef kebabs. Without a lot of practice, there's no way that you can make beef kebabs that are as delicious as mine. You're asking me to open a barbecue stall right now, isn't that neglecting the essentials? Mamie's business will be severely impacted." Meg's brows furrowed. This is indeed a problem, but as a system, if I keep issuing unchallenging problems, wouldn't it make me look like a lowly person? This will make me unable to raise my head in front of the other systems and become their laughingstock. Do you know how it feels to have a bunch of people yelling at you to leave the group every day? The system was silent for a while before crying out in grief and indignation. "Although I do sympathize with you, I'm sorry. This is not within the scope of what I need to know. Acting tough is something that emanates from the inside out. Some people are destined to not be able to act tough. This is life, just like you, system." Meg shrugged. "Nonsense. The system was created by the heavenly axiom. It has all the culinary recipes of Earth for the past 3,000 years. At the same time, it has dabbled in all the civilizations on Earth. It has extremely high attainments in science, history, mathematics, physics, and so on. The system can create everything independently. Such an omnipotent culinary system, why isn't it awesome? Which of those systems that rely on talent dare to say that they are better than me?" The system said unhappily. "System, how much are the lollipops?" Meg suddenly asked. 0.5 copper coins for one. Starting from 2. Buy 10 and you get 2 free. The system replied naturally. "See, this is the difference between you and other systems." Meg rolled his eyes and said, "I've never seen a system that sells lollipops." The system fell into an awkward silence. "Okay, now let's talk about the renovation. I can provide the storefront myself, but due to the tedious and inefficient renovation in the other world, it will lower the restaurant status. Therefore, you have to provide the renovation, and I will pay for it." Meg broke the silence. "How much budget does the host have?" The system immediately asked. "Not much, at most 1,000 gold coins." Meg shook his head and said. "What kind of storefront does the host want to renovate? How big is the area? How much kitchen utensils do you need?" The specific price can only be determined after an evaluation. If it's only 1,000 gold coins, it will only be enough for a simple renovation without any kitchenware. The system said without hesitation. "Anyway, I can only take out 1,000 gold coins now. That's the upper limit. Since it's a branch, it must meet the operating standards. If it doesn't have kitchenware, it can't be considered a complete and normal branch at all. You can decide for yourself." Meg said, "A little scoundrel, a 30 square meter ice cream shop. I need 2 ice cream machines. It's best that the renovation has some ice and snow characteristics. If it's too ugly, I won't pay. 1,000 gold coins is too little. How about a little more?" the system said with some hesitation. Don't think I don't know the market price. Mobai only spent less than 1,000 gold coins to rebuild the shop. Now, we're only renovating a small 30 square meter ice cream shop, so 1,000 gold coins is more than enough for us to hire dwarven craftsmen. We can even buy 2 more ice cream machines with that amount of money, Mag said in a lazy manner. After a moment of silence, the system gritted its teeth and said, all right, 1,000 gold coins to complete the renovation of the ice cream shop and 2 fully automatic ice cream machines. All right, system. Aside from the renovation, I also want to talk to you about the ice cream set. Although 4 flavors of ice cream are already quite rich, a themed dessert shop that specializes in ice cream with only 4 flavors seems a little too monotonous. So, I was wondering if you could open up the recipe for the other flavors of the ice cream set to me. Meg continued with a serious expression. The system can open up the recipe for the remaining ice cream set to the prize wheel. You will have a chance of receiving it after completing the mission, the system said. All right. Meg nodded and turned to the kitchen. He began to prepare the ingredients needed for the morning's opening. Host. That. Do you still want lollipops? Buy 10 lollipops and get 2 free. It's a profit, the system said in a weak voice. Piss off. Meg raised an eyebrow. In any case, the system would never be able to act cool in this lifetime. Chapter 600. The restaurant is not open for business yet. Please come back later, Mag said without even turning his head when he heard the knocking on the door. Mr. Mag, it's me. There's something I'd like to ask you. Gloria's voice came from outside the door. Miss Gloria. Meg opened the door and was surprised to see Gloria standing outside. I'm so sorry to disturb you so early in the morning. Gloria said apologetically to Meg. Then she raised the blueprints in her hand and said, I have some questions for you about the blueprints. You'll be very busy after the restaurant opens, so I came early. Are you free now? Come in. As a business partner, you can ask me anything. Meg smiled and nodded. He opened the door completely and stepped aside to let Gloria in. Thank you. Gloria's face lit up. The smile on her face made her feel a lot more at ease. She walked into the restaurant with the rabbit in her arms. Miss Gloria, what questions do you have about the blueprints? Are the markings not clear enough for the tailor to make them? Meg gently closed the door and asked Gloria with a smile. Gloria pulled out the blueprints for the 2 dresses from the paper bag, and a blush appeared on her face as she looked at Mag. She bit down on her lower lip, and didn't know how to continue. No, sir, your markings are very accurate, and even a tailor would be able to read them. It's just that these 2 dresses, Meg looked at the off-shoulder dress and the backless dress. He then looked at Gloria's expression and said with a smile, Miss Gloria, do you think these 2 dresses are too revealing and open? No, in my opinion, these 2 dresses are very beautiful. I've never seen such beautiful dresses. But... Gloria hurriedly waved her hands, but she was still a little hesitant as she continued, for most women, these 2 dresses would be quite difficult to wear, so there could be some problems with sales. Furthermore, we only have 20 days left before the deadline, so these 3 dresses are our only chance. So you came here today to ask me to modify the blueprints and make these 2 dresses look normal. Meg looked into Gloria's eyes with a calm expression. I respect your opinion, Mr. Meg, but I also have to be responsible to the employees of the Suede Textiles shop. Gloria looked into Meg's eyes with a hint of panic in her heart. Miss Gloria, I really admire your bold and imaginative ideas. Selling ready-to-wear clothes is a forward-looking idea that can change the entire garment industry on the Norland continent. Mag looked at Gloria with a smile, and asked, however, I have to ask you a question now. If you were given two identical pieces of clothing, and one of them was tailor-made to fit your figure perfectly in all aspects, while the other was something that you could only choose between a few sizes. Perhaps it would be a little too big, or perhaps it would be a little too small. Which one would you choose? Gloria pondered momentarily before replying, would choose the dress that fits my body better. Since that's the case, what makes you think that countless people will rush to your door 20 days later to buy all your clothes so that you can survive your losses safely? Mag continued to question her. Gloria's eyes immediately widened as she stared at Meg. I suggest that you make the dress into a premium product. You don't have to make a lot of them, you can only make 4 of each color at most. This dress is targeted at young noble ladies of the same social class as you. They pursue beauty and quality, and price is nothing more than a number to them. Hence, the dress has to be expensive in order to match their temperament. The best way to interest them in this dress is to have someone wear it for them to see. For example, a beautiful young lady could wear a backless dress at a ball, stunning everyone present. That way, all of the women would be curious as to where such a beautiful dress came from, Meg continued. Gloria's eyes lit up even more upon hearing this. As for this off-the-shoulder dress, it's targeted towards the middle class, but the price shouldn't be set too low. It's the kind of dress that middle-class husbands would grit their teeth and buy for their wives. This is a very interesting price range, but it's also very attractive, so you can stock up on it in bulk. There aren't that many gatherings, so they don't have to worry about everyone wearing the same dress sitting at the same gathering. Furthermore, this dress is enough to make them stand out from their peers, Mag continued as he pointed to another dress. Gloria nodded vigorously, and there seemed to be little stars shimmering in her eyes as she looked at Meg. She had thought that Mr. Mag was just a good chef who had a knack for designing clothes, but she didn't expect him to be so clear and logical when he talked about business principles and customer psychological analysis. He had completely overturned her understanding of business. Even Mars hadn't made her feel this way. The only person she could think of was her grandfather, the legend who had redefined Chaos City's business. She could feel that what Meg was saying to her now would have a very profound impact on her in the future. It was as if a door was slowly opening for her. The last chiffon dress is a light luxury dress. It's something that women can buy with their own money, and it can be worn outside or at parties. The price is slightly lower than the previous 2 dresses, but the quality has to be controlled as well, because clothes of this level will be a very important group of customers in the future. However, there isn't much of a difference between this chiffon dress and the ones that are commonly seen on the market, so the most important thing is the effect of the first 2 dresses. At times like this, the concept of branding is very important, Mag continued. Brand? Gloria looked at Meg with confusion. A brand is a set of specific features, benefits, and services that the seller provides to the buyer over a long period of time. It's actually a rather abstract concept. When we talk about banks, the first thing that comes to mind is Buffett banks. This is the so-called brand effect, and the benefits of the brand effect are very obvious. More and more people will deposit their money into Buffett banks because of the 4 words Buffett banks, which brings more profits to Buffett banks. Buffett is the brand of this bank, Mag explained. So what you're saying is that we're going to turn the suede textile shop into a brand, and customers will buy other clothes because of the reputation of the suede textile shop. Even if those clothes aren't all that different from the other clothes on the market, they'll still choose the clothes from the suede textile shop. Is that right? Gloria looked at Meg thoughtfully, and her eyes became brighter. You can think of it that way, but I personally suggest that we remove the last 3 words. Suede is a very elegant name, and adding textile shop makes it sound a little rustic. A brand is like a person's face, and the details are just as important. Meg nodded. He was very satisfied with Gloria's ability to understand, but he still needed to think about the details. I understand. Thank you, Mr. Meg. Gloria bowed deeply to Meg, put away the blueprints on the table, and left. Chapter 601. Mamie's Mid-Autumn Festival Gala was very successful, and it undoubtedly increased the restaurant's popularity. Going to Mamie's to eat was slowly becoming a common phrase in the middle class, and it had also become a habit for many people. Donna, let's go to Mamie's for dinner tonight. Look at my skin, hasn't it become fairer and more tender recently? It's all because of Mr. Mac's tofu pudding. Really? Let me see. I can really pinch water out of it. No. Let's go now. How can you only tell me now that you have such a good thing? Do you still have me in your heart? My man has been complaining about my ugly complexion recently. I'm just trying to see if it works first. I'll tell you as soon as I see the results. Let me tell you, as long as you eat this tofu pudding, your complexion will immediately return to your 20-year-old appearance. That stinky man of yours will definitely try to get close to you again. The two noblewomen held hands and giggled as they boarded a luxurious carriage. Isaac, my dinner party with the guest tonight has been booked at Mamie's, the middle-aged owner said to his waiter in a furniture store. Boss, that guest has always liked peace and quiet. Mamie's doesn't have a private room, and we have to line up. I'm afraid it's not very good, the waiter said hesitantly. I know that he likes peace and quiet, but compared to good food, he obviously prefers good food. This order is very important. The new furniture from the store across the street is fancier than ours. Our chances of getting the order aren't very high, so we have to take some risks. The owner shook his head, and a smile quickly appeared on his face. Of course, the risk of eating at Mr. Mac's restaurant is almost negligible. No one can resist that kind of delicious food, even if they have to line up outside. Okay, I'll make the arrangements right away. The waiter nodded thoughtfully and turned to leave. The last time I asked Miss Gina out for dinner, she didn't seem to be very satisfied. She doesn't seem to like barbecue. Do you think I can still ask her out this time? Moreover, what could he ask her to eat that would make her happy? And then fall in love with me? In a pavilion, a young man with short yellow hair looked at a group of young men around his age. He scratched his head and said with some distress. These young people were all dressed rather extravagantly, and it was clear that they came from wealthy families. They were all smiling as they looked at Coney's, and they all began to offer suggestions. If it were up to me, you should just go to Duca's restaurant and book a big private room. With us brothers backing you up, I guarantee that you'll succeed. Come on, Miss Gina's father is a professor at Chaos School. She has a very strict upbringing, and is a gentle and quiet girl. If we show up together, she's going to be so scared that she won't dare to interact with Salter again. But Duca's restaurant is not bad. If you can order the roast pig, she will definitely like it. Duca's restaurant's roast suckling pig has been reserved for 2 months. By then, it would be too late. Didn't they open a new fish shop a few days ago? I've tasted it, and it tastes good. Maybe Miss Gina will like it. Yeah. Miss Gina mentioned that fish is her favorite food. Can you tell me where that fish shop is? Coney's asked with an elated expression. You guys know nothing about the food in the Aiden Square, and you don't even know how to date a girl. A young man with brown curly hair pursed his lips. Harry Potter, do you have a better recommendation? Coney's turned to him with an expectant look in his eyes. It's very awkward to eat fish on a date when you're not in a relationship yet. Miss Gina eats very slowly, and if she comes across a small fish bone, will she reach out to grab it or swallow it? No matter what she does, she definitely won't go on a date with you again, Harry Potter said with a serious expression. Gasp! Everyone drew a sharp breath, and Coney's expression also changed upon hearing this. The mere thought of how awkward that would be, and he immediately gave up. Of course, if you insist on eating fish, then you have to choose a fish without any small fish bones. That way, you can satisfy Miss Gina's love of fish, and avoid the awkward situation that I mentioned earlier, Harry Potter continued. A fish without any small fish bones. How could there be such a fish in this world? Conies was even more dejected. Harry Potter, you're just spouting nonsense. Everyone rolled their eyes in unison. They had thought that Harry Potter would be able to provide some useful information, but it turned out that he didn't say anything at all. That's why I said you guys know nothing about the food in the Aiden Square. Amy's spicy grilled fish is grilled with fish without any small fish bones, and it's countless times more delicious than the fish shop you just mentioned. If Miss Gina agrees to your invitation, then you should be able to win her heart with this delicious grilled fish, Harry Potter said with a smile. The unknown little restaurant had already begun to integrate itself into the lives of the residents of Chaos City through word of mouth, and it was still expanding its influence. Father, I'm going to class now. Amy put her little wand into her pocket and waved at Meg before leaving the classroom. Today was Julian's class, so Meg didn't have to accompany her to school. Be careful. Meg smiled as he turned to Sally and Yabamia, who were busy cleaning up the table, and said, Aisha, Mia, I plan to hire 2 more employees. Sally and Yabamia both stopped what they were doing and turned to Meg in unison. Boss, is it because Mia didn't do a good job? If I did something wrong, you can tell me, and I'll definitely do a better job. Yabamia turned to Meg with a nervous expression. Sally was also looking at Meg with a perplexed expression. More and more customers have been coming to the restaurant recently, but with the current size of the restaurant and Meg's cooking speed, she and Yabamia were still able to handle it. It's not like that. Mia, you and Aisha are both doing very well. I've never seen anyone do a better job than the 2 of you. I'm not hiring employees because you're not doing a good job. I'm planning to open another branch, so I need more employees, Meg explained with a smile. It appeared that both of them had misunderstood his intentions. Open a branch. Yabamia and Sally were both surprised to hear this. Chapter 602. Meg shook his head and replied, Yes, but I'm not going to open Mamie's. Instead, I'm going to open an ice cream shop that specializes in ice cream. Yabamia faltered momentarily before turning to Meg with a hesitant expression, and asked, You're only going to sell ice cream? Yes, I'm only going to sell ice cream. Meg nodded in a firm manner before turning to Yabamia with a smile, and said, On top of that, I'm planning to make you the store manager of the ice cream shop, Mia. You'll be responsible for the operation of the shop. A panicked look appeared on Yabamia's face as she hurriedly waved her hands through the air. Even her voice was trembling slightly as she said, I can't do that. Boss, I can't be the store manager. She was already very satisfied to be able to work as a waitress. With her status, she could only work in a dark corner, but she was now able to provide sincere service to customers every day, and that made her very happy. However, Meg was going to make her the store manager of an ice cream shop. This was simply too big of a task for her. She couldn't imagine what kind of uproar a half-dragon would cause if she were to become the store manager of a restaurant in the Aiden Square. She was someone who hadn't even been allowed to enter the front hall of a restaurant. Who says you can't do that? If I say you can, then you can. Meg turned to Yabamia with a warm expression and sincerely said, This is not an order, it's an invitation. As the owner of Mamie's, I'm officially inviting you to become the store manager of the ice cream shop, young Mistress Yabamia. In Chaos City, there's no third person who knows how to operate an ice cream machine, so you're the best and only choice. Yabamia looked into Meg's eyes, and he calmed down slightly. However, there was still a conflicted look on his face, and he shook his head as he said, I think Aisha is more suitable for the role than I am. She's so smart and beautiful, so she'll definitely be able to pick it up quickly. Also, many customers will definitely buy ice cream for her, so she's more suitable to be the store manager. I can't even use a dishwasher properly, let alone an ice cream machine that's even more complicated. If you want me to make 2 snowballs, that's not a problem, but if you want me to make delicious ice cream, then I definitely won't be as good as you. Sally looked at Yabamiya with a serious expression and said, Mia, boss is right. No one is more suited to be the manager of the ice cream shop than you. Furthermore, the customers clearly like you more. No one can resist your smile. Yabamiya pursed her lips and lowered her head at the sight of Meg and Sally's warm and encouraging expressions. She was silent for a while before saying, but Mia wants to continue working at the restaurant, and she wants to continue serving those adorable customers. Meg looked at Yabamiya, who had her head lowered and her eyes reddened slightly. She was so thin and frail, and she gave off a very pitiful appearance. When he thought back to the first time they had met, he still found it hilarious and heart-wrenching at the same time. During this period of time, her energetic smile always made people feel that their moods were improving along with her smile. Now, looking at her conflicted expression, he felt as if he had done something wrong. She was still a 17 or 18-year-old girl, after all, and she had never had much confidence in herself. Even now, she still felt a little inferior when she left the restaurant, and this inferiority complex stemmed from her half-dragon identity. Sally looked at Yabamiya and patted her on the shoulder. She didn't try to persuade her any further. Meg pondered for a moment before turning to Yabamiya and said, if that's the only reason, then I actually have a solution. It's just that you'll have to work a lot harder, Mia. I'm not afraid of hard work. Yabamiya's eyes immediately lit up. The ice cream shop and Amy's can operate at different times. When the restaurant is open, the ice cream shop is closed, so you can continue to work at the restaurant. After the restaurant is closed, you can go to the ice cream shop, and the ice cream shop will be open for business. However, in that case, you'll be working 2 jobs at the same time, and it'll be very tiring. Meg nodded. In that case, do I still have to be the manager? Yabamiya was still a little hesitant. Mia, I've always told Amy that she's no different from other people. Half-elves, humans, and elves all exist on equal footing. That's the only way to live in the world. And you're the closest role model that Amy can see. If you can't beat yourself, then you can't beat any enemy. Meg looked into Yabamiya's eyes as he spoke calmly. Yabamiya slowly raised her head, and her eyes gradually lit up as she looked at Meg. She clenched her fists and nodded vigorously. All right, I'll do everything well, including being the manager. I'll be a good role model for Amy. I believe you can do it. A smile appeared on Meg's face. It looked like he would have to take his time to recruit a new server. At the same time, he felt a stab of pain in his conscience. Exploiting his employees like this was a little cruel. A smile also appeared on Sally's face. Let's get ready for business. I'll take care of the matters regarding the branch. Meg rose to his feet with a smile as he made his way out of the restaurant. Aisha, can I do it well? Yabamiya turned to Sally with a feeble expression. Of course. Boss is the best judge of character I've ever met. Sally nodded in a firm manner. Then I'll need your help when the time comes. A smile reappeared on Yabamiya's face. If you're willing to let me work part-time and pay me, then I'd be more than happy to help. Sally nodded, and the two of them smiled in unison. After the morning service, Meg made a trip to the City Lord's castle. The Aiden Square Management Office had already completed the handover of Ricky's rotisserie. He signed his name and paid a processing fee, upon which Ricky's rotisserie would belong to him. TSK, gambling really does a lot of harm. Meg stood outside Ricky's rotisserie, where half of the signboard had been destroyed, and heaved a forlorn sigh. Back in the day, he had only gambled a little on the outskirts of Ricky's rotisserie, but that was purely for the sake of entertainment. He was basically a money spinner, but the money he spent was just a drop in the bucket. Ricky's rotisserie had already been sealed by the city lord's castle, and there was a large copper lock on the door. Meg pulled out the key that he had taken from the city lord's castle, unlocked the door, and entered the restaurant. Aside from the fact that the tables and chairs were a little messy, there wasn't much damage to the place. However, almost everything in the kitchen had been emptied out, and not even a paring knife had been left behind. The restaurant was over 200 square meters in size, and he could imagine how lively it must have been in the past. If that fatso hadn't provoked him with his incessant chatter, this restaurant would have been enough to sustain him for the rest of his life. Chapter 603. The tables and chairs are 80% new, and each set costs 200 copper coins for a total of 8,000 copper coins. The furnishings are all low-grade fake goods, so the price is 2,000 copper coins. The rest of the items are basically worthless, but the system can handle them on your behalf, the system's voice quickly sounded. This is really a one-stop service, you don't want to miss out on a single cent. Meg raised his eyebrows. He didn't expect the system to be so straightforward this time. Considerate service, service to the utmost. This is the system's mission and philosophy, the system said righteously. Such a large restaurant must have cost a lot of money to renovate. These are all solid wood tables and chairs, and they are almost 90% new. 200 copper coins for a set is too cheap, right? Fixed price, 300 copper coins for a set, Meg said decisively, shaking his head. 250 copper coins for a set, definitely not more. If the host thinks that he can find a suitable buyer in a short period of time, you can handle it however you want, the system said decisively. Meg raised his eyebrows slightly. The system was sure that he didn't need the things in this barbecue shop, and he couldn't be bothered to deal with the matter of selling second-hand tables and chairs. With a serious expression, he said, "System, you can be considered half a businessman. 250 copper coins sounds bad, 251 copper coins for a set. Take it away immediately. You are the owner of Mamie's, and you make hundreds of thousands of copper coins a day. You actually want to talk to me about a copper coin price? Don't you think that this is lowering your status?" The system said angrily. "You are the god of cookery cultivation system. You know the heavens above and the earth below. You can build any aircraft carrier or warship you want, and you have an assembly line for airplanes and cannons. What's the point of arguing with me over a copper coin?" Meg retorted in an unconvinced manner. "Deal. All items in the barbecue shop will be priced at 12,040 copper coins. Recycling in progress. Ding. Recycling complete. The cost has been transferred to the host's cashier." After a moment of silence, the system gritted its teeth and completed the transaction. Meg looked at the barbecue shop that had become empty in the blink of an eye. Even the painting of a bird on the wall had been taken away. Even bandits couldn't clean it up so cleanly. "System, this is the location of the ice cream shop. My request is to set aside 40 square meters of space on the far right side of the restaurant and turn it into an ice cream shop. The remaining space on the upper floor and the storefront remain untouched. You may begin the renovation now," Meg said with a smile. "Host, didn't you say 30 square meters? How did it become 40 square meters? If that's the case, the renovation fee we agreed on earlier will be invalid." The system cried out in agitation. Chapter 604. This is my 101st attempt, I should be able to succeed this time, right? Within a cavernous cave, A young woman with short pink hair stood in front of an antiquated stone statue spell formation. She gripped her wand with a nervous expression as she slowly took a step forward before slowly raising her left hand. Ah, which idiot decided that we had to use blood to activate spell formations? There's nothing new about this method at all, and it really hurts. The young girl looked at her delicate fingers with a resentful expression. She looked at the white jade pillar in the center of the spell formation, and then looked at her own fingers. After hesitating for a long while, she gritted her teeth and took 2 steps forward. The woman of the moon will never admit defeat, she said with a determined expression. She pulled out a thin needle and stabbed it into her fingertip with a trembling hand. Arg! An extremely blood-curdling cry reverberated throughout the cave, and a drop of golden blood slowly flowed from her fingertip. Let me see where this spell formation that I've been repairing for 10 years leads to. The young woman's face paled slightly, and her lips trembled as she made her way toward the white jade pillar. Amy's father, are you really going to open another ice cream shop? The kind that only sells ice cream? Amy looked at Meg, who was grilling beef kebabs in the kitchen, with an elated look on her face. That's right. Furthermore, Mia will be the manager of the ice cream shop. It's a shop that only sells ice cream. You'll be able to see it in 2 days. It's a very beautiful ice cream shop. Meg nodded with a smile. I'm afraid I won't be able to do it well, Yabamiya said in a quiet voice with a hint of concern on her face. Wow, big sister Mia is so awesome. Manager. Amy's eyes lit up, and she slowly inched closer to Yabamiya as she whispered, Big sister Yabamiya, you're the store manager, so can I sneak into your ice cream shop to eat ice cream in the future? You can't tell father about this. Meow, Ugly Duckling also made its way over to Yabamiya with anticipation in its eyes. Well. Yabamiya looked like she was in a dilemma. I heard everything. You 2 brats, you're not allowed to sneak over to Mia's place to eat ice cream. Meg turned around and warned the 2 brats. Alright, then I can only eat in the restaurant. Amy stuck out her little tongue and returned to her seat with a resigned expression. Ugly Duckling also shook its head dejectedly. It walked over to Amy and rubbed its head against her calf. She then picked it up and placed it on her lap, where it curled up comfortably. Alright, the barbecue is done. Let's eat. Meg placed the 3 different flavors of roast beef kebabs on 3 separate plates and walked out of the kitchen with a smile on his face. At this moment, a golden light suddenly lit up in the middle of the restaurant. The light was so bright that it was almost blinding. What's that? A perplexed look appeared on Meg's face as he looked at a series of complex lines on the ground. It appeared to be a teleportation spell formation. Sally had already stood in front of Amy and was looking at the golden light with a grave expression. She could sense powerful magic fluctuations emanating from it, and if she wasn't mistaken, that was most likely a very rare type of spatial magic. Yabamiya stood off to the side and looked at the golden light with a slightly perplexed expression. What's that? Amy poked her head out from behind Sally and looked at the golden light with a curious expression. Meow, Ugly Duckling also stood up from Amy's lap and let out a warning cry toward the golden light. It seemed to be a little nervous. The dazzling golden light receded, and a young woman in a long pink dress appeared in the restaurant. She took a look at everyone in the restaurant and raised her chin with a hint of disdain in her eyes as she said, You've summoned the esteemed Princess Barbara here. Hurry up and kneel down to welcome her. Everyone in the restaurant was completely silent as they appraised the young woman who had suddenly appeared. The young woman appeared to be around 15 or 16 years old, and was less than 1.4 meters tall. Her short pink hair made her snowy white skin appear even more translucent, and her slightly round face was quite adorable. However, her complexion was a little sickly pale, and there was a light pink crescent moon mark on her glabella. However, Her expression was a little arrogant, and her words were very childish, making it difficult for anyone to respond to her. I say. Are you all deaf? Why aren't you kneeling when you see me? And how dare you look at me like that? Barbara pointed at Meg with an enraged expression as she yelled, especially that perverted old man with the beard over there. Do you think I'm an old man like you can look at? Old man. Meg's eyes widened. He had lived for so long, and had heard all kinds of titles that others had given him. Even young ladies born after the millennium would sweetly call him uncle when they saw him. Who would have thought that he would encounter a setback here? He was actually being called an old man by a young lady. That sexy mustache was comparable to Ping Yuyan's masculinity, yet he was actually being called perverted. This guy was simply incorrigible. I say, Auntie, where did you come from? You're already so old, yet you're still dressed in such pink to pretend to be a little princess. Aren't you tired? I also know who doesn't have a girl's heart, but it's fine if you play at home, but you came to my restaurant to play Descend, and you even forced yourself to say that you were summoned by us. This is your fault. Which idiot summoned beast would look like this? Ma Chang looked at the pink-haired young lady with a fake smile as he spoke. He was very satisfied with this face that had been altered to look like his in his previous life, and he wouldn't allow anyone to insult it. You. Barbara pointed at Meg, and her face flushed red. She felt as if she was about to explode. No one had ever dared to talk to her like that. This guy with the beard actually called her Auntie. And he even thought that no one would summon a beast like her. The nobles of the Moon Nation couldn't grow beards. This was a very important rule, so this man must be a vulgar servant. It was a great shame that such a servant dared to mock her like this. I'll let you know that you have to pay the price for offending me. Barbara looked at Meg furiously, and raised her right hand. The glass on the counter beside Meg suddenly trembled slightly. Be careful. Sally reminded him with a serious expression. Her right hand was already holding onto her magic caster's staff. I don't know what the price for offending you is, but if you offend me, you'll be blacklisted in the restaurant, and you'll never be able to set foot in the restaurant again, Meg said with a calm expression. You. Barbara was enraged, and blood rushed to her head. Her face instantly paled, and her body swayed, and she fell to the ground. Chapter 605. Father, who is this big sister Pink? Why did she suddenly appear in our restaurant? Amy made her way over to Barbara, who was lying on the ground, with a curious look on her face. She doesn't seem to know where she is, and she calls herself a princess. Could she really be a princess? Yabamiya also made her way over with a perplexed look on her face. I don't know who she is, either. If she's not a delusional person, then she's most likely a princess who came from some remote mountain village. I don't think there's a princess like that in the Roth Empire. Meg shook his head with a shake of his head. He was also rather perplexed by this girl who was full of delusions. She most likely teleported here using a teleportation spell formation, but I don't know if it was a fixed teleportation spell formation or a random teleportation spell formation. Furthermore, she's a powerful spatial magic caster with at least 7th tier power, but there's no princess of her age in the Roth Empire's royal family. Sally put away her wand and squatted down to examine Barbara's complexion. Her brows furrowed as she said, her blood essence is very weak, and that's why she fainted. Then what should we do now? Father, let's save her. Big Sister Pink is so pitiful. Amy looked up at Meg with a pleading expression. Can you wake her up, Aisha? Meg was initially thinking about tossing this silly girl out of the restaurant, but his heart softened upon hearing Amy's pleas. He turned to Sally. I'll try, but I can't guarantee that she won't be hostile toward us after she wakes up. Sally nodded as she pulled out her wand and twirled it around Barbara's head. A faint green halo appeared above her head before slowly fusing into a tender green leaf, which drifted down to her glabella before fusing into the pink crescent moon on her glabella. This crescent moon seems to be rather similar to the one on Princess Irina's glabella. It's just that Her Highness's crescent moon is light golden, while hers is light pink. Could it be that there's a connection between the two? A hint of confusion flashed through Sally's eyes, but she didn't express it. As the tender green leaf merged into Barbara's forehead, her pale face finally regained some color. Her furrowed brows slowly relaxed, and after a while, she let out a soft moan. Before she opened her eyes, her nose twitched, and the rich aroma of barbecued meat wafted into her nose. This aroma, could it be barbecue? But how can the barbecue have such an alluring aroma? Barbara had already sobered up a little, and her heart was immediately aroused by the tempting aroma. Barbecue was her favorite food, and it was an essential part of her daily diet. She had thought that the barbecue cooked by the chefs in the palace was already the most delicious, but after smelling this aroma, she discovered that just this aroma alone was thousands of times better than that of the chefs in the palace. It had already taken half a day to repair the spell formation, and she was already feeling quite hungry. She could already imagine just how delicious the barbecue meat would be once it melted in her mouth, and she began to salivate uncontrollably. Barbecue. Barbara swallowed her saliva as she slowly opened her eyes. Her gaze just so happened to fall upon the kebab in Meg's hand, and her eyes immediately lit up as her stomach began to grumble. She was like a traveler in the desert who had suddenly discovered a source of water. Could it be that she fainted from hunger? She's so pitiful. Amy looked at Barbara with a sympathetic expression. I think that's quite possible. Meg nodded in agreement. Just what kind of suffering did she go through before coming here? Even though she's starving, she still has to put on a brave front and pretend to be a princess. Yabamiya heaved a forlorn sigh. Everyone has their own difficulties, so I can empathize with her. Sally nodded. Ha! Barbara's attention had been completely drawn away by the roast beef kebab, but she immediately raised her head to look at the pitiful expressions on everyone's faces. She suddenly came to her senses, and realized that she seemed to have lost her composure. Her face immediately flushed red, and she couldn't believe that she had been misunderstood by these people. Furthermore, they were speaking to her in such a pitiful tone, as if she were a poor homeless person. However, the cool sensation on her glabella, as well as the nausea she had felt after being teleported away, had completely disappeared. It appeared that these people had treated her after she fainted. Otherwise, she didn't know how long it would have taken for her to wake up. If she missed this opportunity, she might never be able to return. Furthermore, the man holding the 3 plates of kebabs didn't seem to be as ugly as she had imagined. Even though his beard was a little twisted, his face was still quite handsome, and he was quite pleasing to the eye. Meanwhile, the little girl beside him was far too adorable. It was just that her ears were pointy and translucent. The other 2 girls also looked a little strange, but they were both very beautiful. Ahem, I don't need your pity. I've always been the one to take pity on others, while others can only admire me. Barbara got up from the ground and raised her chin again as she said, however, seeing as you've saved my life, I'll overlook your rudeness. Not everyone can come across such a good thing. Even though she still wore a haughty expression as she spoke, she couldn't help but glance at the kebabs in Meg's hands out of the corner of her eye. Her throat was still trembling slightly as she tried to restrain herself from swallowing. All right, princess. If there's nothing else, you can leave now. We have to prepare to eat. Meg rolled his eyes as he turned to Barbara with a smile. It appeared that this girl really was hopeless. Big Sister Pink, you have to go eat as soon as possible. It'll be bad if you faint from hunger. Amy cautioned with a serious expression as she caught Ugly Duckling, which was just about to pounce on her. She held it in her arms and knocked it on the head as she said, "Ugly duckling, don't try to pounce on beautiful big sisters whenever you see them. If you do that again, I'm going to throw you away." Sally took a glance at Barbara to see that she didn't harbor any animosity toward her, so she put away her wand and made her way over to the long table. Yabamia opened its mouth to say something, but it looked at Meg before obediently closing its mouth again. It clearly wasn't a good idea to invite someone to eat with them without the boss' permission. Meg placed the kebabs on the table and sat down. He picked up his chopsticks and looked at Barbara with furrowed brows. Chapter 606. I refuse. Meg shook his head without any hesitation. He pointed at the door with his chopsticks and said, "The door is over there, Your Highness. Please step out from there. Of course, if you want to eat in the restaurant, you can go out and line up first. You can order after the restaurant officially opens. Here, even princesses have to line up." You. Barbara stared at Meg with her mouth wide open, as if she couldn't believe her ears. This guy actually refused her request, and he even told her to go out and line up before she could eat in the restaurant. Blood rushed to Barbara's head, and her body swayed. She felt as if she was going to faint again, and she had to support herself with the table beside her to support herself. "Your Highness, please don't faint just because you don't like what you say. It's going to affect our meal progress. It's going to be hard on Aisha to save you, and she still has to go to work in a while." Meg raised his eyebrows as he looked at Barbara with a resigned expression. He didn't know if this girl was suffering from hypoglycemia or anemia, but she was simply too weak. Barbara glared at Meg, and she supported herself with the table as she tried to leave. She had never been humiliated like this before. She was a noble princess, so how could she accept this? Thus, she had to leave. "Father, this big sister is so pitiful. Look at how weak she is, it looks like she can't even walk. Why don't we?" Amy looked at Barbara with pity in her eyes. She took a bite out of a kebab, and an expression of enjoyment appeared on her little face as she chewed happily. "Today's roast beef is also delicious, it's fragrant and tender." Gulp. Barbara, who was about to leave, couldn't help but gulp. She looked at Amy, who was immersed in the delicious taste of the roast beef, and felt as if her legs were filled with lead. She looked at Amy and thought to herself, "This little girl is so cute, so she must be very kind. Maybe she'll take the initiative to ask me to stay for dinner. When the time comes, I'll just have to say no and sit down, and then I'll be able to enjoy the delicious roast beef." Amy swallowed the beef in her mouth, and only then did she think of Barbara. She looked at her with a sweet smile, and said, "Why don't we let her sit down and watch us eat? She should be able to walk after resting for a while." Barbara felt as if an arrow to her heart. Was there anything crueler in this world than letting a starving person watch others eat? This little girl looked innocent and cute, but if she was cut open, she would definitely be as black as her father. After taking 2 steps toward the door, Barbara's legs went weak, and she lost control of her body and fell directly onto a table, facing Meg and the others. Her face turned even redder, and she tried to get up, but she felt as if her body was completely powerless. She felt as if her heart had been twisted into a fried dough twist. Damn it, why did it have to happen now? It must be because that stupid stone pillar just now sucked too much of my blood. My reputation is going to be ruined here. I think this little girl is really hungry. She can't even stand. Boss, why don't we let her eat with us first? Otherwise, she won't even be able to walk out of the restaurant. Yabamia looked at Meg and said. Yes, father, I think big sister Mia is right. This little girl must have run away from selling matches, and she's about to starve to death. Amy nodded in agreement. Meg thought for a moment, then nodded and said, "All right, then let our princess sit down and eat something first." This little girl really did look like she was starving. It would be a little inhumane to drive her out like this. "Let me help you over." Yabamiya got up and walked toward Barbara. Barbara straightened her body slightly and nodded slightly. "All right, since you guys are so sincere in inviting me, I'll reluctantly agree to eat with you guys. However, I have to use silver cutlery, wash my hands with white flour dew, and wipe my hands with a silk towel. I'll drink a bowl of soup first, and then, the faucet is in the kitchen, and the cutlery is on the table. I didn't prepare any soup for lunch today. Of course, if you feel wronged, you can refuse." Meg interrupted Barbara, then smiled and said, "Also, you're only eating in advance. It's not free." Barbara stared into Meg's eyes for a while before averting her gaze in the end. This man was the most ungentlemanly, brazen, and petty man she had ever seen. However, Barbara chose to give in the end as she smelled the alluring aroma of roast meat and looked at the glistening roast beef. She pursed her lips and harumphed lightly, but didn't dare to show too much displeasure on her face as this man really could kick her out right now. "When I get back to the royal palace, I'm going to get father to find this guy and let him know who the princess of the Moon Nation is. I'm not someone a bearded man like him can humiliate." Barbara thought to herself viciously as she allowed Yabamiya to help her sit down at the long table. Meow. Ugly Duckling, which was lying in Amy's arms, extended its little paw and meowed at Barbara with a hint of hostility in its eyes. "Humph, kitty, how dare you yell at me?" Barbara also glared at Ugly Duckling, neither of them willing to back down. "Ugly Duckling, don't bully Big Sister Pink. She can't even beat you now." Amy pressed down on Ugly Duckling's little paw with a meaningful expression. Meow. Ugly Duckling took a glance at Barbara before withdrawing its little paw with a disdainful look on its face. "Ha! I'm being looked down on by a kitty." Barbara was starting to doubt her life. "There's just enough food on the table for us to eat. You can choose 1 or 2 dishes for lunch now, and I'll go get more," Meg said to Barbara in a calm voice. She was a customer now. "I want roast meat. 1 plate." Barbara withdrew her gaze from Ugly Duckling and looked at the roast meat on the table without any hesitation. "There are 3 flavors of roast meat. Do you want one of them, or some of all 3? Meg asked. "All 3 flavors are super delicious," Amy reminded in a quiet voice as she took another bite of the roast beef in her hand. "I want all 3. Barbara nodded. Chapter 607. The kebab that had just been removed from the grill was still steaming hot, and the alluring aroma of roast meat wafted over. Barbara's eyes lit up as the aroma of roast meat became extremely clear and rich. It was hard to imagine that roast meat could give off such an alluring aroma, and she felt as if she were in a dream. However, she secretly pinched her own leg under the table, and the sharp pain made her realize that this wasn't a dream. Instead, this was reality, and there was an irresistible kebab right in front of her. "Then I'll just have to force myself to try this roast beef." Barbara tried her best to maintain a calm expression as she grabbed a kebab. This method of eating wasn't very elegant, and under normal circumstances, she definitely wouldn't eat food like this. However, she had just seen the little girl grab a kebab with one hand and take a bite of it with her mouth, and she felt that this was the correct way to eat a kebab. Meg took a glance at Barbara before walking toward the kitchen with a faint smile on his face. He had seen even more stubborn people in the past, but all of them had succumbed in the face of delicious food in the end. "But I feel like you really, really want to eat it." Amy looked at Barbara with a merciless expression. Yabamiya and Sally also had smiles on their faces. This little girl had just swallowed her saliva countless times in front of them, and her words were completely unconvincing. Let me see if this bearded old man's roast meat really is as good as it sounds. If it's just the aroma, then I'm definitely going to make father shut down this restaurant. Barbara's face became even redder as she looked at the kebab in her hand, and bit into the entire kebab in a slightly angry manner. Yup. Barbara's eyes immediately lit up as she bit into the tender beef. She chewed carefully, and juices began to flow from the beef. The rich aroma of the meat intertwined with the sauce that had been applied to the beef, and the delectable flavor exploded in her mouth. It was as if her taste buds had been ignited and were cheering. They were screaming. Every time he chewed a whole piece of beef, he would feel full of satisfaction. The fat in the beef made the texture of the beef very distinct, making it impossible for him to stop chewing. Every time he chewed, it would be an extreme enjoyment to his taste buds. The slightly spicy texture was a result of the miraculous effects of the spices. It was like a stroke of genius, elevating the flavor of the kebab to a whole new level. It was as if Barbara could see a strong and muscular bull galloping across the plains, its strong muscles making one drool. More and more bulls gathered to form a herd and galloped across the plains. The sound of their footsteps was like a drumbeat that fell on her heart. The rhythm was so moving. Is this beef? This is incredible. It's countless times better than the roast beef cooked by the royal chefs. These are two completely different types of food. Barbara's soul was trembling, and she felt as if she had been eating fake roast beef for the past decade or so. The tender kebab slid down the tip of her tongue, and Barbara swallowed it. She felt as if a warm current had flowed down her throat and into her stomach, and the warmth immediately spread to her limbs and bones. Her sore and weak legs slowly recovered some feeling and strength, and a hint of color returned to her pale face. The effect of this kebab is so special. It actually has some effect on blood essence. Barbara immediately opened her eyes, and looked at the kebab in her hand with an incredulous expression. She had been lacking in blood essence ever since she was a child, so she often fainted. She had eaten countless rare fruits and received treatment from all of the renowned doctors in the Moon Nation, but none of them had any effect. She didn't think that this small piece of beef would have an effect even greater than that of a spirit fruit. Barbara bit into the second piece of beef with surprise and uncertainty in her heart. The delicious flavor wreaked havoc in her mouth, and wave after wave of delicious flavor made her almost forget to breathe. After swallowing the second piece of beef, the warm current in her stomach became even more pronounced, and it felt as if blood essence was slowly being generated and flowing into her blood vessels, then into her limbs and bones. This feeling was very special, and it was as if rain had suddenly fallen from the sky in a dry desert. Even though it was a little insignificant, she could clearly sense that this was a cycle, and it wasn't just being emitted by the beef. Could it be that there's a cure for my illness? Barbara almost couldn't believe her own feelings. Countless doctors had determined that there was no cure for her illness, and she had to pretend that she was fine every time she fainted. Was there really going to be an end to her days like this? Barbara's eyes were already red, and she took another bite of the beef. She was enjoying the delicious flavor, and at the same time, she was also hopeful that her illness could be cured. What's wrong, Big Sister Pink? Are you going to cry because of the delicious food? Amy asked in a quiet voice. I think so. This is the first time I've eaten Boss's food, and I also feel like I'm dreaming. It's so delicious. Yabamiya nodded in agreement. In the kitchen, the smile on Meg's face became even more vibrant. The temptation of delicious food really was irresistible. Even though this girl was a little tsundere, she still revealed her true colors in the face of delicious food. Roast beef really is delicious. Barbara quickly finished the kebab, and she couldn't help but exclaim as she looked at the barren bamboo skewer in her hand. However, she quickly noticed that everyone was looking at her, and a faint blush appeared on her face. Thinking back to what she had said earlier, she really wanted to find a hole to hide in. "Your Highness, is the roast beef kebab to your liking?" Meg stood at the entrance of the kitchen, and looked at Barbara with a smile. It's not bad." Barbara was going against her will as she looked at Meg, and carefully appraised him from head to toe again. When she had first been teleported here, she had been a little nervous, so she didn't pay much attention to him. All she could remember was that mustache, and she immediately associated it with a perverted old man. However, Meg was standing at the entrance of the kitchen, and he was wearing a clean black and white chef's suit. He was tall, and appeared to be around 30 years of age. The mustache on his upper lip didn't appear to be that perverted. Instead, it gave him a sense of maturity. Chapter 608. There's nothing on my face, is there? Princess, I think you should continue eating. If you faint in the restaurant again, I won't be able to take responsibility, Meg said with a smile as he went back into the kitchen to continue roasting meat. Stinky man. Barbara blushed, but her attention was quickly drawn to the roast beef kebab in front of her. She picked up another kebab, and this one was a little different in color from the previous one. She took a bite, and the aroma of garlic wreaked havoc in her mouth. It was completely different from the previous kebab, but it was still delicious. After eating 3 kebabs of different flavors in a row, Barbara was completely won over. It was so delicious that she couldn't stop eating. She had never eaten anything as delicious as this in her life. What was even more miraculous was that after eating 3 more kebabs, her feeble body had almost completely recovered. The blood essence flowing from her stomach into her veins made her feel as if she had been rejuvenated. What's your name, Big Sister Pink? Moreover, you said that you are a princess, then what kind of princess are you? Why do you look like you haven't eaten for many days? Could it be that your nation has already been destroyed, and you were hunted here by your enemies? Is that why you fainted as soon as you appeared? Amy asked as she looked at Barbara with a curious expression. Amy's string of questions attracted the attention of Yabamiya and Sally. Meg was also looking at Barbara with a curious expression. He was rather curious about this Chunibu girl's background. After all, spatial magic casters were very rare, and his 7th-tier spatial magic caster was even rarer. The principal of Chaos School, Novin, was a powerful spatial magic caster. No one could predict whether this girl, who had become a 7th-tier magic caster at the age of 15 or 16, would be able to become another spatial magic caster in the future. My name is Barbara, and I am the only princess of the Moon Nation. You live in the Moon Nation, but you don't know who I am. And you dare to say that the Moon Nation has already been destroyed? What a joke. Is there a nation more powerful than the Moon Nation in this world? Even on that faraway continent, there's no nation that can compare with the Moon Nation. Barbara said with a proud look on her face. Moon Nation. Meg and the others were puzzled. We're currently in Chaos City on the Norland continent. Chaos City isn't under the jurisdiction of any country, so we shouldn't be in the Moon Nation, Yabamiya said. As for Barbara, I've never heard of her. I've only heard of Princess Fios of the Roth Empire, Princess Irina of the Elven race, and the princesses of the Dragon race. Sally also shook her head. If I'm not wrong, we should be on the distant continent you mentioned. But miss, you don't really live on the moon, do you? Meg's expression suddenly became a little strange. Barbara's words gave him a strange conjecture. On the moon. Amy's eyes lit up. This is not the Moon Nation. Barbara's eyes also widened. She swept her gaze over Meg and the others, and saw that they weren't joking or lying. She immediately panicked. For someone like her who had never left the royal palace, the furthest place from home was the stone in the corner of the royal palace's garden. However, she had never stepped out of that stone because she had a powerful and loyal old servant following her closely. Of course, that loyalty was only for her father. It was because of this excessive love that she had persistently repaired the ancient teleportation formation in the cave behind the garden for the past 10 years. Even if the teleportation destination was only one wall away, it was worth it for her to take the risk. At least she could prove to her father, who always used, "You're still young," that she was no longer a little kid who needed someone to follow behind her all the time. However, she didn't think that things would get out of hand. The teleportation destination wasn't one wall away from the royal palace, nor was it a city in the Moon Nation. It was very likely that they were teleported directly to the continent known as the Ancient Continent that could be seen in the Moon Nation. Yes, this isn't the Moon Nation. We've never even heard of the existence of the Moon Nation. Meg nodded with certainty. He didn't know if this girl really came from the moon, or if her worldview that she had painstakingly built had been shattered in an instant. Her expression didn't seem fake at all. Barbara picked up a kebab and took a bite of it to calm herself down. After a while, she suddenly jumped up from her chair and looked at Meg. She repeated, "This really isn't the Moon Nation." The Moon Nation. If your mind isn't in a mess, then perhaps there's a problem with your teleportation formation. It should be an ultra-long-distance teleportation formation, so you've appeared here, which is far beyond the borders of your so-called Moon Nation. Meg nodded. Looking at Barbara's expression, he suddenly felt a sense of familiarity. To a certain extent, this girl's current situation could be considered a kind of transmigration. If it weren't for the fact that he had read a few web novels during his time as a student, his reaction to transmigration would most likely be even worse than hers. How? How is this possible? Barbara paced back and forth in the restaurant, and took another bite of kebab. Her heart was racing, and even her mind had gone completely blank. She had forcibly repaired the teleportation formation, and as soon as it was activated, she heard a cracking sound, so she didn't even consider using the teleportation formation to go back. After finishing a kebab, Barbara also stopped in her tracks, and stood right where she had been teleported from. Her wand reappeared in her hand, and she began to chant a spell. Silver light flashed on her wand, and it then transformed into a pillar of light that fell toward the ground. Circles of spell formation light emerged from the ground, and surrounded Barbara. Dense magic fluctuations began to appear. Is this a teleportation formation? Crassus, who was standing at the very front of the line, looked into the restaurant with a hint of surprise. I didn't think that there would be an ancient teleportation formation here. I wonder where this one leads to. Julian's eyes also lit up, and he moved his hands under his wide sleeves, and an invisible magic barrier enshrouded Amy's body. Crassus took a glance at Julian before withdrawing his gaze, and didn't say anything. Chapter 609. Your Majesty, Princess Barbara is missing. In a majestic palace, a female magic caster in a gray robe reported to a middle-aged man with a crown on his head with an urgent expression on her wrinkled face. What? The king abruptly rose to his feet, and hurriedly rushed forward as he asked, Barbara is missing. Haven't you been following her this entire time, Mage Greya? How could she be missing? Your Majesty, I was supposed to leave the palace for an hour today as usual, and the princess is being watched by the palace maids. However, I couldn't find the princess anywhere today, and the palace maids couldn't tell me where the princess had gone, so I came to report this to you, Your Majesty, Greya replied in a sheepish manner. Barbara is quite mischievous, but she has always abided by the rules of the palace. She wouldn't leave the palace at will, and there are guards all around the palace, so she most likely hasn't left the palace. Go and find the princess. The king calmed himself down before issuing an order. Your Majesty. An elderly official hesitated momentarily before making his way over to the king, and whispering something into his ear. "Is that true?" The king's expression changed slightly upon hearing this. "I saw the princess enter that place before, but she told me that she was just having fun, so I didn't take it to heart. If the princess can't be found anywhere in the palace, then perhaps you should go and take a look, Your Majesty." The elderly official nodded in response. Before the elderly official had a chance to finish his sentence, the king had already made his way out of the palace. Not long after that, the king and the elderly official appeared in a spacious cave. There was an antiquated spell formation at the center of the cave. The spell formation appeared to be quite ancient, and there were a series of conspicuous cracks all over it. However, the entire spell formation seemed to have been damaged. All of the materials used to repair it had been shattered, and there were even some new cracks on the spell formation. Only the white jade pillar at the center of the spell formation was still intact. "Your Majesty, the ancient teleportation spell formation has been activated. Judging from the magic fluctuations, it should have been activated less than an hour ago." The elderly official walked around the spell formation with a grave expression on his face as he said, "Only the princess can activate the spell formation. If the teleportation was successful, then she could. How is this possible? He's just a child." A pained expression appeared on the king's face as he looked at the broken rune. He knew very well where the rune led to. It was hidden in the depths of the palace, and only he could enter and exit the cave. However, this spell formation had been abandoned countless years ago. It had been repaired several times, but it still couldn't be used, so it was most likely that the teleportation spell formation on the other side had been destroyed. However, Barbara had managed to repair this spell formation and activate it. Maybe someone repaired the teleportation array on the other side, and Her Highness just happened to activate it at that time. The elderly official also wore a grave expression on his face. He knew how important Princess Barbara was to the king, and if she really was teleported to that continent, she would be all alone. This was a scene that the princess, who had lived an extravagant life since she was a child, couldn't imagine. Will she be able to teleport back? The king looked at the elderly official as if he were grasping at straws. This teleportation spell formation has already been severely damaged. Before it's repaired, Her Majesty won't be able to teleport back. The elderly official shook his head. The king clenched his fists and fell silent for a moment before ordering, "Pass down my orders. All magic casters who are proficient in spell formations and spatial magic, as well as skilled craftsmen, are to enter the palace." "Yes, Your Majesty." The elderly official glanced at the king with a concerned expression before quickly departing. "Barbara, wait for father. Father will definitely come and take you home." A dull voice reverberated throughout the silent cave. "That seems a little too violent." Meg's expression was a little peculiar upon hearing Amy's words. "But didn't we agree to be a little more violent? Just like this." Amy looked at Mag, and then raised her little hands into little fists, and put them in front of her little face as she earnestly said, "Eat. Pay up. Otherwise, I'll beat you all to death." Amy is so cute. Yaba Mia smiled as she pinched Amy's little cheeks. "Big sister Mia, I'm super fierce." Amy bared her teeth at Mia with a serious expression, and she looked even more adorable now. "Don't be in a hurry. Let's see if Her Majesty can teleport back first." Mag shook his head with a smile. The murder of 4 kebabs was far too gruesome, and he couldn't bring himself to do something like that. If this Chinibu girl could really teleport away, then she could be considered a successful one-time transmigrator. If she could travel freely between worlds, then perhaps she could even become an outstanding transmigrator. There were many transmigrators who could do that. The silver light became brighter and brighter, and Barbara's body was almost completely enshrouded. A series of complex runes appeared on the spell formation on the ground, and it looked as if it were about to fly away. This spell formation can be activated too. A look of elation appeared on Barbara's face. She was most worried that the spell formation would break down, and then everything would be for naught. However, this spell formation was clearly more complete than the one in the royal palace, and it was successfully activated after being activated. Bu, two faint sounds rang out, and the silver light instantly receded. The light from the spell formation disappeared, and the ground returned to normal. It failed. How could this be? Barbara stood at the center of the circle with a forlorn expression. She looked at the ground and the wand in her hand, and was unable to accept this reality. It failed. Amy's eyes lit up as she put down the wand and picked up another kebab. In that case, does that mean she won't be able to go home? She seems to be very sad. Yabamiya turned to Barbara with a concerned expression. The teleportation failed, so the spell formation on the other side must have failed. In that case, she won't be able to go back, Sally said in a soft voice. It's fine if she can't go back. As long as she's still alive, she'll be able to survive. Transmigration isn't a big deal. Meg offered words of consolation to Barbara, who was on the verge of tears. He had transmigrated here after dying, and at the very least, she hadn't experienced what it was like to die. That's easy for you to say, but if I can't go back, then I won't be the princess of the Moon Nation anymore. I won't be able to continue living in my castle, and I won't have an endless supply of dresses to wear every day. I'm so sad. Wah. Barbara glared at Meg before sitting down on the chair again, crying as she ate her kebab. Well, that's quite a tragic story, but you still have to pay for what you're eating. Meg looked at Barbara with a sympathetic expression. Chapter 610. That's right. Money, which can also be referred to as currency, is a product of exchange. On the Norland continent, the current common currencies are copper coins, silver coins, gold coins, and dragon coins. You ordered a total of 9 kebabs, and each kebab costs 300 copper coins, so you spent a total of 2,700 copper coins. Meg explained with a serious expression before turning to Barbara, and saying, "Don't tell me you didn't bring any money with you because you left in a hurry. This kind of cliché plot of running away from home is really too cliché." Barbara touched her dress, and suddenly realized that she hadn't brought anything with her aside from her wand when she stepped into the teleportation formation. In her eyes, there was nothing better than her identity as the princess of the Moon Nation. Everyone would respect and love her, and give her the best food, so she didn't have to worry about her livelihood. As for money, she had never come into contact with something like that before, and didn't know what it was for. However, she had to pay for the kebab she had just eaten, and she didn't have anything in her pocket. Her identity as the princess of the Moon Nation wasn't recognized, so she didn't know what to do. Sally slowly lowered her head, and a faint blush appeared on her cheeks as she chewed on a kebab. "Big Sister Barbara, you have to pay for your meal. Otherwise, you'll be dining and dashing, and people who dine and dash will be beaten to death," Amy warned in a serious manner as she looked at Barbara. I don't have any money." Barbara's face was flushed, and she hesitated for a moment before replying in a dejected manner. She suddenly regretted walking into that spell formation and placing her finger on that stone pillar. Wasn't it better to be a little princess in the royal palace? Unfortunately, there was no medicine for regret now. In this unfamiliar place, the first problem she faced was how to solve the problem of not having enough money to pay the bill after eating. Furthermore, this shop owner didn't seem like a benevolent person. She didn't know what copper coins were, but 2,700 was definitely not a small number. She was completely penniless, and she didn't have anything of value on her aside from her wand. That adorable little girl was no pushover either. Why was she being beaten to death just because she didn't have money to eat? Such a restaurant was simply a black restaurant, right? Of course, if they were in the Moon Nation right now, Barbara wouldn't mind rewarding Meg with a hefty reward. That kebabs were indeed the most delicious kebabs she had ever tasted. No money. Meg's brows furrowed as he looked at Barbara. He had already expected this, but when it came to her words be said to him, it was a little different to him. Ever since Amy's opening to the restaurant, no longer be it to dine and dash. Under the threat of Amy's threat, customers who didn't have enough money would all leave the restaurant to be seen on the menu too, and all of the customers to the restaurant to the food, to the extent to the customers, to the extent to Amy's, Amy to the customers. The restaurant's rules were cash transactions and no credit was allowed. But now, Barbara had already eaten the beef kebab, but she didn't have any money on her. Even if they detained her here, no one would come to bail her out. This was because she had just transmigrated here, and she didn't have any relatives. This problem suddenly became very troublesome. What should we do now, Father? Big Sister Barbara is quite adorable, wouldn't it be a pity if we beat her to death? But if we don't beat her to death, then the restaurant's rules will be broken. Amy turned to Meg with a troubled expression. Meg looked up at Barbara. Amy's question was exactly what he was thinking. Don't do anything stupid. I'm the princess of the Moon Nation. If you dare to do anything stupid, my father will come looking for you, and that will be the day of your doom. Barbara immediately panicked as she looked at Meg with a nervous expression while gripping her wand tightly in her hand. The restaurant fell into a peculiar silence, and the atmosphere was a little tense. Boss, didn't you say you wanted to hire 2 more waitresses? I think Princess Barbara can consider it. If she becomes an employee of the restaurant, then we can deduct the cost of the kebabs from her salary. That way, we'll be able to settle the bill, and Princess Barbara can continue to finish the rest of the kebabs. Yabamiya broke the silence with a smile. That sounds like a great idea. In that case, Big Sister Barbara will become the 3rd waitress of our restaurant, and we'll be a family. Amy's eyes lit up with elation. Sally looked at Barbara with a reserved opinion. Mag was also looking at Barbara with furrowed brows, but he wasn't in a hurry to express his opinion. He had very strict standards when it came to the selection of waitresses in his restaurant. Barbara had always been a spoiled brat, and it was hard to say if she would even be able to take care of herself. Asking her to become an exceptional waitress was like asking a cow to fly up a tree. I definitely won't become a waitress. I'm a princess. If the citizens of the Moon Nation find out that I'm working as a waitress, who will support me as their queen in the future? I wouldn't do something like that even if I were to die. Barbara said resolutely before Mag had a chance to speak. Aren't you already unable to go back? We've never even heard of the Moon Nation, so of course the people of the Moon Nation won't know that you're working as a waitress here. Yabamiya persuaded earnestly. Furthermore, if you become a waitress, then you'll receive a fixed monthly salary, as well as a certain amount of allowance for meals. You'll be able to eat delicious food in the restaurant every day, and that's a much better life than wandering the streets. You're not familiar with this place, so where can you go after leaving the restaurant? Barbara looked at Yabamiya, and her mouth gaped open, but she was at a loss for words. If she couldn't do anything in this world without money, then she really didn't know where to go with her penniless self. She stole a glance at the dining table to find that half of the roast beef kebabs had been eaten, and there were still 5 left untouched. There were also other dishes on the table that were also very tempting. Most importantly, the teleportation spell formation to return to the Moon Nation was in this restaurant. If her father repaired the spell formation in the Moon Nation, then she could use that spell formation to return to the Moon Nation. Only by staying in this restaurant would she be able to constantly observe the situation. Chapter 6:11. Perhaps you have some misunderstanding about the word waiter. The so-called waiter refers to a person who provides necessary services to the customers. I am the owner of this restaurant, and I have no intention of retiring for the time being, so I don't need to find someone to replace me as the manager. Although the restaurant needs to recruit new waiters, every waitress has to go through a test. If you want to become a waitress at Mamie's, you have to pass my test first. Meg looked at Barbara and couldn't help but laugh. This girl really didn't have any common sense. Are you saying that you want me to serve those customers like how the palace maids serve me? Barbara looked at Mag with incredulity. Mag nodded. You can think of it that way. However, as a waitress in a restaurant, you don't have to be like your maids and carefully wipe your face clean with a towel. You only have to do your job well, and maintain a friendly and distant relationship with the customers. Really? Barbara looked seriously at Meg's face. Serving others was something that would never have appeared in her life before today, but today's situation was somewhat out of her control. The roast beef kebabs made by Meg had a very special effect on her body. If she could eat them consistently, she might be able to completely improve her condition of lacking blood and qi. This was a condition that had troubled her for more than a decade. I don't think I need to answer your question now. You have to be clear about a very practical problem. I am not the one begging you to be a waitress at this restaurant. There are many better choices in the free market. They are skilled in the food and beverage industry service skills, and they don't need a long period of training and practice before they can directly get to work. Mag looked at Barbara and calmly said, Now, I can give you a chance to showcase your abilities. If you can prove that you can do the job of an attendant and be more efficient than the average person, then this job will be yours. Is there such a strict requirement to be a waitress? Barbara's eyes widened a little as a fierce battle broke out in her mind. In the end, her desire to roast beef kebabs and go home defeated her pride. She looked at Meg and nodded. All right, although using me as a waitress is a complete waste of my talents, I am reluctantly willing to accept this job. Isn't a waitress's job just to serve dishes? This is a piece of cake. Barbara stretched out a finger and hooked it at the plate with the kebab on the table. The plate floated up and appeared in her hand in a flash. The kebab on the plate didn't move at all. I can quickly place the plates on every table. Not everyone has this ability, right? Barbara looked at Meg with a smug expression. She picked up a kebab from the plate and took a bite with a confident smile on her face. Amazing! Yabamiya looked at Barbara in awe. The plates are flying. What miraculous magic! Amy also exclaimed softly. Meg's eyes also lit up. Spatial magic casters were very rare, and this young girl was at least a 7th-tier spatial magic caster. If she were to use spatial magic to serve dishes, then she would have an advantage that no one else could compare with. Even though it felt like a bit of a waste. However, thinking about it, he had already used a 7th-tier water elven magic caster to clean the restaurant, so it didn't seem like a big deal to have a spatial magic caster serve dishes. Indeed, not everyone can do this. If you can clearly remember the order and quantity of each customer's order, then you can become an employee of Mamie's. Meg didn't express his praise on his face as he nodded at Barbara. My memory is pretty good. Barbara nodded with confidence. Don't be too full of yourself. Meg turned and entered the kitchen. Soon, he came out with a pile of plates of different sizes. He then pointed at the tables in the restaurant and said, Come in from the door. The tables are numbered from 1 to 4, and I'll tell you what plates are required for each table. Memorize them, then place all the plates on the table in order. If the number of wrong plates is less than 3, then you pass. Barbara nodded and said, No problem. This won't stump me at all. Table 3 requires 2 plates, 4 bowls, and 2 small plates. Table 6. Meg recited a string of numbers, and Barbara's relaxed expression also became very serious. Now, please begin your performance. Meg listed out 8 plates and bowls at the same time. This was already quite a demanding task for her to memorize. This test is very similar to mine. Can she pass? Yabumia looked at Barbara with a nervous expression. Do your best, big sister Barbara. Amy took a bite of beef, and encouraged her in a slightly inarticulate voice. Sally also looked at Barbara seriously. She didn't have much of a bad impression of this girl. Although she was a little spoiled, she wasn't to the point where she couldn't be saved. Barbara closed her eyes and thought for a while. When she opened her eyes again, the hundreds of bowls and plates on the table beside her floated up at the same time. They circled around her, and then flew out one by one, landing lightly on each table with almost no sound. In the blink of an eye, over 100 bowls and plates had all landed, and not a single one was left. Did I get it right? Barbara exhaled softly, and turned to look at Meg. Although she pretended to be relaxed, she couldn't hide the nervousness in her eyes. You got 2 wrong, but it's not bad to have such a high success rate on your first try. Meg walked over and picked up a plate and a small plate from tables 3 and 7. He looked at Barbara with a smile, and said, Congratulations, if you're willing, you'll become the 3rd waitress at Amy's. After deducting the beef kebabs from your first month's salary, your daily allowance will be 600 copper coins. A hint of elation appeared on Barbara's face, but she quickly repressed it. She looked at Meg with an indignant expression, and said, I can only eat 9 beef kebabs with the money I earn in a month. How am I supposed to survive in this place? Also, I can only eat 2 beef kebabs a day. If I eat like this, I'll starve to death, 600 copper coins a day. You can go out and ask around if there's a second restaurant in the Aden Square that would offer such a price to an intern waitress. If your salary can only afford 9 beef kebabs, then you shouldn't complain that your salary is too low. Instead, you should choose to eat the food that your salary can afford. Meg looked at Barbara with a calm expression. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.